Welcome to my compilation video of every cut, change and addition that was made to the third cour of the Bleach 1000-Year Blood War arc anime. This third season had the most anime exclusive content thus far, with all new fights, transformations and flashback scenes which were not included within the original manga. Some of the highlights were definitely Ichigo's anime original fight against Uryu, Uryu's Volstagg reveal, Ukitake's new flashback scenes, as well as an all new flashback of young Yhwach with the Soul King, just to name a few. Now this video compiles together all of my manga versus anime comparisons for the third cour of the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime. I do hope that this video helps you to understand how the anime is adapting the manga through all of the different cuts, changes and additions that are being made. So without further delay, let's dive into the third cour of the new Bleach anime.
Before the video begins, only 20% of the people who actually watch my content are subscribed to the channel. If you enjoy these videos, then subscribe and stick around for more content just like this. Now let's get back to the topic of the video.
It's been over a year since we last did a manga versus anime video on the channel, as Bleach is back under a new studio called Pierrot Films, with the quality being better than ever, as we have been promised even more anime original scenes which build upon the material in the manga. Cour 3 kicks off with the 27th episode titled A, and it's named after the Shrift ability the Almighty, which belongs to Yhwach, and it's awakened in the second half of episode 27. The first half of episode 27 pretty much recaps material from the second half of episode 26, as it adapts material from the very end of chapter 608 to the midpoint of chapter 609, with the addition of one anime original scene that we haven't seen before. The second half, however, adapts new material from the midpoint of chapter 609 all the way up until the end of chapter 611. In addition to this, we have the anime original fight between Uryu versus Senjumaru, which does conclude within this episode. So before I give everything away, let's dive into my manga versus anime comparison of episode 27 of the 1000-Year Blood War arc anime. Episode 27 begins with Nimaya exclaiming that he is about to show them how Squad Zero gets serious. Now all of this is streamlined content which was adapted from the second half of episode 26. When Senjumaru activates her Bankai in episode 26, we saw Isshin and Ryuken reacting to the tremors which were created from a Bankai release in the world of the living. But this episode shifts to an anime original scene which we haven't seen before, where Ichigo and the others react to a Bankai release. Ichigo comments that this is the Reiatsu of Senjumaru, as Yoruichi adds that she has activated her Bankai. Ganju is overwhelmed by the spiritual pressure, as he says that he has never felt anything like it before. Ichigo adds that his new clothes, new powers and everything that he was taught was from the Zero Division, and it leads to Orihime asking Ichigo that if they are that amazing, then they won't lose to the Quincy, right? Ichigo agrees that they most likely can handle Yhwach and his Quincy, but he does give off a bit of a defeated expression after saying this, as it hints that he may not be so confident in their ability. The episode then cuts back to Senjumaru's Bankai as she defeats each of the Schutzstaffel members. Now all of this I've already covered in my episode 26 manga versus anime video, including how each of them are trapped within her Bankai and how it foreshadows the fights that the Quincy would go on to have later in the story arc. So material from the end of chapter 608 to the midpoint of chapter 609 is adapted until the mid-card of the episode. This pretty much recaps the second half of episode 26, with the only new addition being that reaction scene of Ichigo and the others commenting on Senjumaru's Bankai release. The second half of episode 27 begins with the material from the midpoint of chapter 609, with Yhwach awakening his power. Yhwach's The Almighty activation also results in the Schutzstaffel being freed from Senjumaru's Bankai. This explains how Haschwald is present to comment on Yhwach's power. The anime rearranges the order of events. In the manga, Yhwach's Shrift the Almighty is revealed at the end of chapter 609, but in the anime we instead get Haschwald's explanation of Yhwach's power, and this is from the beginning of chapter 610 before the big reveal of the Almighty. Now things like this happened a lot during Cour 2, where cliffhanger endings at the end of chapters were reorganized due to the difference in the mediums that the story is being told in. It makes sense in the anime to give us the lengthy explanation from Haschwald before showing us the big reveal. After Haschwald's explanation from chapter 610, we then cut back to dialogue from the end of chapter 609. This is where Haschwald says now Yhwach has regained regain the power to see all that is about to take place. While he is speaking, we get some brief anime exclusive scenes where Ichibei strikes towards Yhwach, but we see the Almighty in action as the Quincy leader evades the attacks and Ichibei charges towards him, but Yhwach suddenly appears behind him. We have a couple more anime exclusive moments where Ichibei fails to strike Yhwach, and this is all before the big reveal where we learn that Yhwach's shrift is called the Almighty. So now the anime exclusive battle between Uryu vs Senjumaru continues and a lot happens here. The Almighty appears to free Uryu from the fabric that he is trapped within. The visual effects look amazing as the Quincy reishi gradually dissipates from his chest as he springs back into action. Senjumaru wonders if Uryu has gained power after Yhwach had activated his shrift. The anime shows us this mysterious sequence where Uryu's eyes turn red with blue Quincy veins appearing around them intermittently. Senjumaru then threatens to sew Uryu's eyelids shut if he refuses to back down. Uryu challenges her to try and keep up with his speed as he fires a powerful arrow at her, but the Zero Division member appears to have entered into a different realm as she now is in the different draped fabrics as she moves around Uryu. Multiple fabrics then emerge from the ground as they begin to chase Uryu, but it seems like his speed is unmatched and it appears as though Yhwach has given him quite a considerable power boost. Uryu then uses Rain of Light against Senjumaru, but he then appears behind her ready to attack, but suddenly the floor transforms into lava and it even hits Uryu in the face, but he is immediately healed thanks to his Quincy powers. Senjumaru then kickstarts a epic counterattack as she questions what a Quincy can hope to accomplish against her. She once again escapes into her fabrics which spin around Uryu, raining down rocks at him. Uryu avoids the rocks with ease as she then tells him that she will get rid of Uryu and the remnants of his race. Now shockingly, hollows begin to fall from the sky, but they are effortlessly destroyed by Uryu, but he ends up being trapped by one of her fabrics which strangely seem to appear from within the body of a hollow that Uryu has just destroyed. Now while he is stuck, Senjumaru smiles as more hollows spawn out of her fabric and begin to rain down towards Uryu. While he struggles to destroy them, he ends up being fully trapped by her fabric and is now grounded. She tells him that she does not enjoy toying with her opponents, saying that if he only remained within the human world then he would have avoided death. She calls him an insect as she pierces the back of his neck with a sewing needle. Now this is in fact the Shikai form of a Zanpakuto Shigarami. We then see a drop of blood which falls to the ground as a light begins to erupt from Uryu as we cut to Yhwach and we adapt material from chapter 610. A page of dialogue is cut from chapter 610 where Yhwach reiterates what the Almighty is again. He speaks about how his eyes are open from this moment on and he can see everything that will unfold into the distant future. All the powers that he has seen take his side. Not only can they not be used to defeat him, but they cannot be used to harm him. This emphasizes that this is the power of the Almighty. Now this entire page is cut as we instead shift to Ichibei telling Yhwach not to get too cocky. So Ichibei activates his magnificent death mausoleum which is faithfully adapted with some padding to make the ability feel like more of a spectacle within the anime, with all of the amazing CGI work that is done as it emphasizes the scale of this ability. The rest of chapter 610 is faithfully adapted into the anime. So the awesome anime exclusive material continues in episode 27 as towards the end of the episode we cut to Uryu gaining yet another power boost as it seems like he is activating his holy form, as Senjumaru questions if he really thinks that he can escape her Bankai, but Uryu tells her that it is her who is trapped within her own Bankai. Suddenly we see Senjumaru with her own fabrics wrapped around her like a cocoon, as Uryu draws his bow and swears upon the pride of the Quincy that he will kill her. He fires an arrow directly through her as he appears to have won. Ichigo, Urahara, Ukitake, as well as Mayuri appear to be seen reacting to the defeat of Senjumaru. Uryu is then shown to be struggling to wield his new boosted power as he falls to his knees while releasing his holy form. We once again see those red eyes here and the blue Quincy veins and sparks of reishi around his body. After gaining control over his powers, Senjumaru's Bankai quickly becomes undone as Hashward and the other Schutzstaffel members appear behind Uryu. Before cutting to the credits, the first 7 pages of chapter 611 are adapted, and this is where Yhwach declares that the Zero Division has fallen. This perfectly syncs the anime back up to the manga, seamlessly having integrated all of these anime original sequences which we have just seen involving the Schutzstaffel versus the Zero Division. We get an anime original scene here while Yhwach ascends to the Soul King's palace, as steps appear which are made up from reishi. This is honestly one of my favorite sequences from this entire episode. While he is climbing, we get glimpses from Yhwach's backstory which happened at the start of episode 14. Then we see the flashback where Yhwach had met Ichibei from 1000 years ago, and this was from episode 24. During all of this, Yhwach speaks about the loss that the Quincy have endured at the hands of the Shinigami. He says that the purpose of the war against the Shinigami was to destroy the calamity that is the Soul King. We then see those absolutely incredible flashbacks from the beginning of episode 7 where Yhwach's original Quincy army had fought against the Gotei 13 from 1000 years ago. Episode 27 ends with Yhwach standing in front of the Soul King declaring that the struggle of the Quincy will end with the death of the Soul King, as we then cut to the credits. Episode 27 does have a post-credit scene which adapts the remainder of chapter 611. A comedic panel is cut from the anime where Orihime apologizes to Ganju because he fell out of a Santen Keshun. He appears to be hurt but tells her not to sweat it. When they spot Ichibei's body, some dialogue is streamlined here as Ichigo says that Ichibei trained him and Rukia, and this is cut. Orihime also saying "I'll try healing him" is cut, and Ganju shocked questioning how he is in pieces is also removed. Nothing is really missing here, it's just inconsequential dialogue that doesn't really affect the flow of the story, as we cut to the point in the anime with Ichibei calling out to Ichigo in his mind. After Ichibei is healed, a small panel of Ichigo shouting at him "What the hell, I thought you were dead" is removed from the anime, as we cut to Ichibei explaining how he was able to return. The rest of chapter 611 is pretty faithfully adapted into the anime as Ichibei pleads with Ichigo to stop Yhwach, and when Ichibei explains that the Soul King is the key to the world, we get some nice anime exclusive visuals of Karakura Town, Hueco Mundo and the Serete in order to build upon the emotional weight of this moment. So Ichigo and the others rush off to the Soul King's palace, but we do then see a brief scene of Shunsui within Muken as the camera pans up to show Aizen. Now in the manga, Shunsui appearing before Aizen doesn't even happen until the end of chapter 616, so they are really teasing us by showing this early here. The post-credit scene for episode 27 ends with Yhwach wishing farewell to the Soul King as he stabs him, referring to him as "my father who has seen the future." This brings the episode to a close as it's adapted all the way up until the end of chapter 611. Core 3 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime begins with a very impactful episode, which half of it was recap. The second half certainly made up for any shortcomings with the amazing anime exclusive fight between Uryu versus Senjumaru. Then you have Yhwach versus Ichibei, which was finally concluded here, and the amazing additional scenes that are being added anywhere and everywhere, like seeing Yhwach walk up those steps towards the Soul King's palace. Now it's additions like this which truly flesh out the story and add emotional weight to what is going on. With the introductory episode over, I am really excited to see what we have in store for us next week with episode 28 titled The King. Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 28 titled Kill the King marks a major turning point in the series. I do believe that this is the first proper episode of Core 3 as we continue the final arc of the Bleach series, with this episode roughly adapting material from chapters 612 to 614, and even some manga panels from chapter 615 are adapted here. The episode exceeds all expectations as it also introduces us to an impressive 8 minutes of anime original content featuring a never-before-seen fight between Yhwach and Ichigo. This addition significantly alters the flow of the story in comparison to the manga. Pierrot Films don't hold back as they deliver one of the most incredible episodes of Bleach to date, with the pacing and the order of events diverging in bold ways from Tybw's original manga. The anime staff have plenty of time to reveal to us new details like Yhwach's backstory, as well as exploring more information about the past of the Soul King. These are details that were not a part of the manga, but they do add so much missing depth to the story. The anime takes massive liberties with the structure of episode 28 because so much material is changed from how it happens in the manga. This is especially surrounding the timing of events and how dialogue from the manga is being reworked into new anime-only scenes. Things like the Gote 13's meeting with Urahara and the events that unfold at the Royal Palace are heavily reworked here, and I do think that the changes are for the better. The episode begins with dialogue from the very end of chapter 611, and this is immediately after Yhwach impales the Soul King. For this reason, the first two pages of chapter 612 are not adapted into the anime, as they reveal what happens moments before Yhwach stabs the Soul King. We see the bodies of the gods of the Soul King while Yhwach walks forward. There is dialogue here which is reworked into an anime original scene later in the episode, and this is where Yhwach refers to the Soul King as an imperfect god who is unable to escape even in a moment like this. The anime original flashback then begins, and it truly is fascinating as we see the two eyes of the Soul King with the Almighty activated, and it takes on an appearance that we have never seen before. Each iris has a kaleidoscope effect with this multicolored prismatic look as the irises appear like jewels that are reflecting light. I assume that each of these colors represent a piece of the future that the Soul King is seeing. This is a visual representation of his omniscience. We then see a very young teenage Yhwach with half of his body submerged in this ocean, which may be an endless stream of reishi. Now this moment here depicts a part of the Bleach world and how it looked before Hueco Mundo, the Soul Society, and the world of the living had even existed. So this is one area of the original primordial world of Bleach, and it's our first proper reveal of this original world in the Bleach anime. The scene then shifts to a distant shot of the Soul King who is floating on this water with his sword pointing downwards as ripples spread out from him. We then cut back to Yhwach, and he has grown older and he looks like a young adult now with longer hair. We did briefly see this moment during Ichigo's journey down Irazusando in Thousand Year Blood War Cour 2, but now we are getting a very clear glimpse as the Soul King wields a mysterious sword and he points it over the vast ocean, and we are then shown these three ripples form on the water's surface. This is revealing to us the moment that the Soul King split reality into the three realms. We cut back to Yhwach, and he now appears to be the age of Old Man Zangetsu, or how he had looked like when he had first launched the attack on the Soul Society 1,000 years ago. The water then quickly overflows and submerges Yhwach completely, as we then see him rapidly de-age and become a baby. Meanwhile, we see the Soul King's limbs severed and the sword in the distance, revealing the moments that had led up to him being encased within the crystalline structure. We are then shown a flashback from the very start of episode 14 with Yuha as a baby, as it seems like he was reborn into the world after the Soul King had split reality. Now this is incredibly important because we get a brief shot of young Yhwach with a tear rolling down his face, and he is upset for a number of reasons. Firstly, before reality was split into three realms, there was only one eternal realm where the concept of death did not exist. The Soul King introduced death and the fear of death into reality. This links to Yhwach because as a baby, he was born without the ability to see, hear, or move. He had gained strength to use his senses and to acquire more power by sharing a piece of his soul with others. Yuha was able to cure the ailments of others by touching them, and when these individuals died, they would return the fragment of Yhwach's soul to him, and this in turn would also empower him. However, with each piece that had returned, he would hear the overwhelming cries of their fear. They did not want to die, they were afraid. Now have this happened to you a few thousand times, and you'll understand why Yhwach had felt abandoned and betrayed by the Soul King, who is his father. The betrayal stems from the Soul King having the strongest form of the Almighty, with the four irises that we had just seen. With this, the Soul King was able to foresee the future of all beings within every realm. He knew that the suffering mortal beings would endure by introducing the concept of death to reality. He knew that the Quincy, which his son would go on to lead, would endure a humiliating defeat and exile at the hands of the Soul Society. Most shocking of all, the Soul King knew that he would become a powerless linchpin, a sacrifice for the sake of this new reality, one that exists for the sole purpose of maintaining the stability of the newly created realms. Despite the Soul King knowing that all of this would happen, he still decided to split the eternal world and let things unfold as he had foreseen them. This is why Yhwach asks him if he has heard the screams in his heart of those who have been abandoned by him. We then get a visual of Ichigo laying on the ground defeated, and this I believe to be the fate of Ichigo. Initially, this moment is shown to us via the perspective of Yhwach, but then we cut to the eyes of Ichigo as we see him ascending to the royal palace to stop Yhwach. It seems like he too was shown the future that awaits him, and he even briefly thinks, what was that just now? Now this is an entirely anime original scene where we see Orihime use her powers to carry the team upwards. This is followed by new material as we get this close-up shot of the Soul King, and then this shot of Ichibei from behind. Even more anime original scenes are shown to us here as they hint at how a lot of manga moments are being reworked in this week's episode. We see Renji ask what are these tremors, as Rukia says that she has never felt anything like this before, and she has a bad feeling about this. It's to be noted that Byakuya is also seen standing behind them. There is also an anime original scene with Mayuri as one of his subordinates is dragging 4 cylinders behind them, and we can assume that these contained the zombified bodies of Kensei, Rose, Hitsugaya, and Rangiku. Mayuri comments on the tremors that they are experiencing as he says that the 3 realms have become unstable. As he looks up towards the sky wondering just what on earth are the Quincy thinking to do. We are then shown multiple reactions from across the Serete, including Bazbi and the Bambis, and this is before we cut to Karakura Town and we see Ryuken sitting at his desk and he is holding pieces of the Silver of Stillness. This is incredible foreshadowing, and I love that they're showing this so early in the story here. We see also a frame on his desk of his late wife Kanai Katagiri holding a young Uryu. Ishin is also shown to be reacting to the tremors as he stands outside of Kurosaki Clinic. We cut to Yhwach as new dialogue is mixed with text from page 2 of chapter 612. In the manga, this is shown moments before Yhwach stabs the Soul King, but in comparison to the anime, he has already stabbed the Soul King here, and he goes on to say the manga dialogue moments before Ichigo and the others arrive. So the new dialogue of this scene has him asking if the Soul King can hear the footsteps of the dawn of a new world. Then dialogue from the manga is said as he speaks about how he will bring an end to the Soul King's endless humiliation. So from the beginning of chapter 612, we then cut to chapter 613 as the final shot of this pre-opening scene ends with material adapted from page 12 of chapter 613, with Yhwach noticing that Ichigo and the others have arrived to confront him. After the opening song, the episode starts by adapting material from pages 10 to 11 of chapter 614, and the order of events is heavily changed around, because the rest of chapter 614 is adapted towards the end of the episode as we now transition to an all-new anime original fight sequence between Ichigo and Yhwach. Before the fight begins, we get some anime original dialogue from Yuha, who tells Ichigo that everything is under his control. So this fight features some incredible art and animation, including Ichigo firing multiple Getsuga Tensho attacks, the two of them hurtling throughout the skies as they fly over all of the different cities of the royal palace. This is highlighted as we see shots of multiple areas, including Korinji's hot springs. During the fight, Yhwach uses Sanctobogen and Ichigo deflects it with a Getsuga Tensho. Yhwach uses Qual Crease, a ability previously used in Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 7. Unlike last time when Ichigo was buried under rubble following the attack, with his Jewel Zanpakuto he is able to neutralize the attack much to Yhwach's surprise. Ichigo fires a Getsuga Jujisho, but Yhwach immediately responds with a Sanct Zwinger. Both of the attacks collide, creating a gigantic cross shape in the sky, with Yhwach coming crashing down into one of the discs that float around the Greater Soul King Palace. Yuha reveals that Ichigo's training has certainly made him stronger, as he assumes that he must have entered Irazu Sando under the guidance of the Zero Division, and he is aware that Irazu Sando would have given Ichigo its everlasting memories and revelations. But Yuha says that even going through all of that training training is not enough, as he reveals that he has not even used the powers of the Almighty yet in the fight. After getting back up, he activates the Almighty as we begin the next phase of the fight. Yuha easily overwhelms Ichigo here, as he appears to be no match for the Almighty. Yhwach says to Ichigo that he finally sees it, but yet he still decides to turn his blade against him. This is in reference to the flashbacks of the Soul King that Ichigo had seen during his training in Irazusando. Yuha tells him that the more that he turns his blade against him, then the more deeper that he will fall into despair. Yuha continues to repeat himself as he says that he has seen everything about Ichigo's future too. So Ichigo comes crashing down in front of Orihime and the others as Yhwach rises victorious over him. Rukia and Renji then get a reworked interaction which actually alters their appearance in pages 6 to 9 of chapter 612. It is to be noted that this interaction is while they are on the way to Urahara's lab. In chapter 612, they actually land outside of the lab and meet with Shinji, Soifon, and Omaida. However, the anime pretty much cuts all of these interactions out completely from chapter 612, as instead we have two anime original scenes involving the two parties. So let's first go over the 3 cut pages from the manga chapter. So the two of them arrive and they get the attention of Shinji, and there's a lot of comedic light-hearted banter here which is removed from the anime, where Renji says that Shinji looks like he's gone through hell, but then Omaida backs Shinji up as he appears to have a lot of respect for him since Shinji had arrived to rescue him and his sister. Soifon is also seen telling Omaida to quieten down as she explains that the injuries on Omaida's sister were healed thanks to the hard work of Momo. Soifon also surprisingly tells Renji to cut Omaida some slack when Renji questions why he had brought his sister to the battlefield. Renji kind of compliments Soifon here as he says that she is mellowed out, but Rukia dismisses him, saying that Soifon has always been nice. Now this is fascinating. Soifon ushers all of them to go into the lab as Renji questions whether if everybody is here, and then from Shinji we get elaboration as to why everybody has come to the lab. Apparently they had all received a message that all captains and lieutenants need to disengage from whatever fight they are partaking in, and they need to come to the lab as fast as possible. So yeah, all of this isn't in this episode. In the anime, Renji asks what is happening in response to all of the tremors that they are experiencing. Rukia says that Urahara may have an idea of what's going on, as she says that they should head to the research and development department, and Renji tries to lead but he points in the wrong direction as Rukia leads the way instead. Now the anime shows us Shinji, Omaida and Soifon's characters with new dialogue with a reworked scene too. Shinji comments on the shaking going on for a long time as Omaida wonders if the other captains and lieutenants are doing okay. Soifon reassures him, saying that if he is fine then the others must be fine too. Now Renji's line from the manga where he compliments Soifon has instead been given to Shinji, and it's Momo who responds as she agrees with him. Shinji compliments Momo as he says that she did a great job on healing them, but he says that it's a shame that she wasn't able to heal Soifon's sharp tongue. Momo kind of agrees, but then she immediately apologizes, realizing that Soifon is behind her, but Soifon is too focused on the unusual tremors and the changes in the air. But Shinji tells her that it's useless to rack their heads over it, as he advises her to stop yapping or else they're going to leave her behind. But Soifon ends up rushing off before them, as it seems like they too are headed towards the lab. Now we then get a fascinating scene of Ukitake treating Kinpachi. He is working desperately as he pleads with Kinpachi that he cannot die yet. So the anime does have these really cool panning shots, and we see Mayuri and Nemu here with the 4 cylinders, and in the background we can see somebody moving around, and it looks like Byakuya who is heading towards the lab. So the anime then continues with more anime original material, which is reworking manga content, as Akon talks about how Urahara needs tremendous amounts of spiritual pressure in order to create the gate. Then we have a new scene of Nanao speaking with Urahara. She asks Urahara to confirm that this war had begun with the Quincy's grudge against the Shinigami following their defeat 8,000 years ago. Urahara confirms that this is correct, but she is confused about why the Quincy's had headed to the royal palace instead of destroying the Shinigami. Urahara turns around to look at her as the scene cuts away. Now fascinatingly, this anime original scene, which is the aftermath of Ichigo vs Yhwach, reveals some critical information and dumps quite a bit of lore to us. Yuha tells Ichigo that he must have seen it too, the eternal world that had once existed, as well as the darkness that had threatened this eternal world. He tells Ichigo that he had seen the true power of the Soul King, which was strong enough to repel the darkness, but even someone as strong as the Soul King, who has the power to overturn the world, had ended up being used for the sake of bringing stability to reality. Yuha explains that the Soul King was able to see everything that was going to happen in the three realms of Hueco Mundo, the world of the living and the Soul Society. He would even be able to see 1,000 years into the future with his clear vision. The Soul King had foresaw the tragedy of the Quincy when they had lost the Shinigami, as Yuha says that the Soul King, Adonius, had foresaw it all. Despite seeing everything, the Soul King still decided to abandon the Quincy's. Urahara responds to Nanao as he says that the Quincy's have faced near extinction twice, all because of them not fitting into the system of this world, which is centered around the Shinigami, who serve to exist as balancers who maintain and govern over the flow of souls between the Soul Society and the world of the living. Urahara says that if the Quincy King has arrived at the royal palace, then it can be for only one reason. We then cut to Yhwach as he reveals his goal, stating that he is going to kill his father and create a new world. The name of the Soul King was first teased to us during the Ashvalan chant read out in Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 26. And in fact, the name of the Soul King was also teased to be revealed by Kubo on his fan club outside. In question 483, Kubo had responded by saying that the Soul King actually has a name outside of his title, and the name may be revealed in the anime. The Soul King's name, Adonius, is actually taken from the Gnostic Archon god, and in Gnostic tradition, Adonius, or as he is also known as Adonai, is an Archon or a god associated with the sun, and it is often seen as a divine but binding force which is responsible for maintaining the mortal soul's attachment to the physical world. This concept does align with the role that the Soul King plays within Bleach, as he is a sustainer of the cycle of life and death across the Soul Society, the human world, and Hueco Mundo. In Bleach, Yhwach's use of the Ashvalan technique, which is a redistribution of energy which sacrifices certain Quincy's in order to empower others, has a lot of parallels with the Archon god Adonius. The Ashvalan acts as a holy selection, and it reflects a Gnostic belief in a selective divine hierarchy where power is granted or taken based on divine judgment. This mirrors the way that Adonius oversees the binding of souls, with Yhwach using Ashvalan to reclaim and redistribute energy, which is similar to Adonius's control over the fate of souls. The incantation used during Ashvalan also references a coffin of Adonius, suggesting that there is a binding or containment of light and life within a coffin. In Gnosticism, often this symbolizes the sun's role in both nurturing and entombing. The Soul King, like Adonius, embodies both life-giving and restrictive power, ultimately reflecting a dual nature of creation and confinement. This concept provides a huge layer of depth to the symbolism that the Soul King's role has within Bleach, where he is both the source of all spiritual energy and a figure whose existence limits the world by ensuring a fundamental balance is always maintained. When Cour ended, several people on the Bleach subreddit actually began to come out with several theories about the Soul King's name being Adonius, so huge props to these people for coming to this conclusion before everyone else. For now, this is as much depth as I can go into in this video, but in a few days I'll drop a dedicated video on this subject matter about the Soul King's name and more details about this huge Bleach theory that I have been working on, and how all of this actually links back to the Hell arc, so you definitely do not want to miss that video. Despite hearing Yhwach's reasoning, Ichigo gets back up, drawing his swords ready to fight once again, as Yuha wonders if he has a reason to fight him. Ichigo says that he has come here to stop him and to protect the three realms. Yhwach warns him that the Quincy blood which is flowing through his body will not let him accept the existence of the Soul King. This anime original scene amazingly ends with Ichigo charging towards Yhwach as Orihime is seen behind him, healing him very quickly. We then cut to material from the first 3 pages of chapter 613, and this is where Ichibei apologizes to Ichigo and the others, and this happens while a anime original scene is being shown of Ichigo firing a Getsuga Tensho towards Yhwach. The manga, however, has Ichibei apologizing before Ichigo and the others actually confront Yuha back, while in the anime it is well after the confrontation and after Ichigo begins his battle against Yuha back. Now, it's at the 15-minute mark where we reach the midpoint of the episode. The second half of the episode begins with an anime original scene of Rukia and Renji speaking, and Renji asks Rukia, could it be that the Zero Division have lost? Rukia says that she isn't sure, but the spiritual pressure causing tremors within the Soul Society must be as a result of one of the Zero Division members releasing their Bankai or something equivalent to it. Renji wonders if this really is the cause of the tremors, as Rukia suggests that this is a best case scenario, but she is feeling uneasy about the situation. She just hopes that Ichigo and the others are not in danger. Now, this is a pretty cool scene as Renji reassures her here that they will stop Yuha back no matter what, and they need to believe in them without having any doubts. When Rukia and Renji land at Urahara's lab, like I mentioned before, we cut the interaction between them, Shinji, Omaida, and Soifon from chapter 612 as we see them walk straight into the lab after they greet each other. The rest of chapter 612 is heavily reworked as a lot of material is cut and reworked to fit the streamlining of the anime. The anime makes it seem like they all spontaneously decided to return to the lab, but the manga is very direct that Urahara sent out a message for the captains and lieutenants to return. Let's first go over the manga version so that we can appreciate the full extent of the changes here. So chapter 612, we begin with Yushiro greeting Shinji, Renji, and the others as Soifon gushes over Yushiro being there, and this is where we get a hilarious moment in the manga where Soifon gives some pocket change to Yushiro. But from this light-hearted moment, we quickly shift to Shinji asking Urahara what is going on, as he then updates them on the battle situation with each of the captains and lieutenants, including how they haven't been able to reach the captain and lieutenant of Squad 10. Now, we know that they are in those cylinders that Mayuri is dragging around with him. Now, this is important. Shinji asks Urahara why is it that he has gathered all of them here, what is he intending on doing? Now, here Urahara tells them clearly that he wants to storm the royal palace, saying that it is possible with the combined spiritual energy of all of the captain class Shinigami who have assembled here. The anime cuts out all of this as it just has Urahara say that he is glad that they could all make it, and he has been waiting for them as he needs their strength for something that he is planning. Rukia does ask Urahara what the cause of the tremors could be, as he responds saying that he isn't sure of the exact cause, but he knows that these tremors are tied to the safety of the Soul King. We then cut back to round 2 of Ichigo vs Yuha back, and there's more anime original material here as Yuha tells Ichigo that he is arrogant for wanting to protect everyone. He asks him if he really thinks that he is the only one who can do this, as Ichigo says that even if someone else is able to do it, it doesn't mean that he should run away and do nothing. Yuha says that Ichigo, despite knowing that the Soul King is a sacrifice who exists to maintain the balance of the realms, why is it that he still wants to oppose Yuha back by protecting the Soul King? Before Ichigo has an opportunity to answer, we then cut to Yoruichi laying out her wire trap, and this is actually taken from page 14 of chapter 615. Unlike in the manga, where Yoruichi uses this move as a distraction so that Orihime can heal the Soul King, in the anime it is randomly inserted here during Yuha back's fight with Ichigo. The wires are easily burnt away by Yuha back's reishi. The flames of the reishi that Yuha back used burn away the curtain that is concealing the Soul King behind him. We loosely return to manga content from chapter 614, page 11, where Yuha reveals that he knows that before coming here they had met with Ichibei and they had revived him, and he had talked them into coming here, continuing to say that they have arrived too late as we are shown the Soul King impaled. The anime shows us a brief flashback from the end of the last episode where Yuha impales the Soul King, and the manga simply has Yuha back declare that the Soul King is dead and there is nothing that they can do now. However, the anime replaces this with dialogue from Ganju, who asks if the Soul King is dead and if Yuha back had killed him. Yoruichi says that he is still alive, and this leads to Ichigo rushing to pull the sword out of the Soul King's body. The anime continues on track with the manga as it adapts the remainder of chapter 614 as Yuha back's explanation of the Quincy blood in Ichigo's body, which is not accepting the Soul King to exist, happens before he cuts the Soul King in the anime, but in the manga he says this after the Soul King is cut down. Following the death of the Soul King, we get an anime original scene with Yuha back explaining in order to completely destroy destroy the seal of the Soul King, it's important that one must possess Quincy, Human, Shinigami, Fullbringer, and Hollow powers which are all combined. This is why Ichigo was needed by Yhwach to complete this final step of destroying the Soul King. Yhwach continues to explain that Ichigo awakened his powers as a Shinigami and acquired all of his subsequent powers, all for the sake of this one moment, where he would end the life of the Soul King. We then do get some anime original scenes of the three realms shaking, as the anime shows the devastating impact on reality after the death of the Soul King. We get the collapse of the roof of Urahara's lab, and this is somewhat taken from chapter 615, and this is reworked into this scene here. We also see the tremors in Hueco Mundo, and most notably we cut to Karakura town with Ichigo's friends Keigo, Mizuhiro, and Tatsuki, as they say that there is no information about the epicenter of the earthquake and it's not normal. They assume that this must be something to do with the Soul Society, as Tatsuki looks at the soul pass that Shunsui had given to her and thinks of Ichigo. We then switch to manga content from chapter 615, with Urahara getting up from the rubble asking, is the Soul King dead? The anime does have new dialogue for Nanao asking if Ichigo and the others didn't make it. We then cut back to dialogue from chapter 615 with Shinji exclaiming, what are the Zero Division doing? Ukitake is seen in the anime standing outside despite us not having really seen him finishing this treatment of Kenpachi, and this was in fact shown in detail in the manga before Ichigo killed the Soul King. Akon wondering what is going to happen next is also a new scene in the anime. Now, the episode omits a single manga panel from chapter 615 where Urahara explains what he logically thinks is going on. In the manga, he says that he doesn't want to believe it, but Squad Zero was wiped out and Ichigo didn't make it in time. Instead of having this, the anime adapts the following panels with Urahara saying that if they do nothing, then at this rate, the three realms will cease to exist. The episode ends by adapting the final page of chapter 614, where Yhwach tells Ichigo that together they will witness the end of the Soul Society. And then we cut to the title card for Bleach episode 28, Kill the King, as the outro song starts to play. Because of how much has been reworked from the manga, there are still two notable omissions from chapters 613 and 614 in this episode, which I haven't covered, and this is mostly content surrounding the lab and all of the captains and lieutenants that have gathered. I think a lot of this stuff from these two chapters may be reworked and adapted into next week's episode, but I do struggle to think how it's going to be done, because it's a mixture of light-hearted and serious moments, and I don't know how it's going to be included with the three realms about to collapse and everyone being really concerned. I mean, in particular, chapter 613 shows Ukitake leaving the treatment room as he says that everybody is back on track, revealing that he has healed Kenpachi. But in this episode, we had seen Ukitake standing with everybody, as we are left to assume that he must have healed Kenpachi. The manga gives more of a detailed breakdown as to what is going on from chapter 613, as pages 4 to 13 were not included at all. We see Kenpachi leaving the treatment room as he tries to leave and find Yachiro, but Urahara stops him with a Kido barrier, and Nanao has to even intervene in order to convince Kenpachi to stay and help Urahara. Urahara tells everybody to stand inside of the circle and to pour their energy into the orbs that he hands to them as they prepare to storm the royal palace. In addition to this, the Vizards arriving and Urahara explaining their role is also removed from this episode, and this is content from pages 1 to 9 of chapter 614. So yeah, this is the Vizards once again returning to the story as Urahara explains that he wants to create a gate to enter the royal palace, as the Vizards are told that there are Shinigami Shihakusho there for them to wear as they join with the Gote 13 to storm the royal palace. Now yeah, I am under the impression that all of this stuff is going to be hopefully included in episode 29 in some way. So this week's episode didn't have a post-credit scene, and it really was a difficult task to determine just what was and wasn't adapted, because so many scenes occur out of sequence, which is fine, but then you have manga dialogue which is mixed in with a lot of anime original scenes. This means that entire moments from the manga are not being cut, but are instead being reworked for the anime. This truly is a reimagining of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, and there is a huge deviation in the way that the story is being told in the anime, because there is so much more that is being revealed to us in comparison to the manga. A lot of concepts that we only know from the Can't Be Your Own World light novels are also being included here, and honestly, this is a dream come true. This is what we were all waiting for. It feels surreal to experience the final arc of Bleach the way that Kubo had intended for it to be written in the manga. character. Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 29, titled The Dark Arm, continues to push the boundaries of the anime's adaptation of Kubo's manga. This episode focuses on adapting material from chapters 615 to 618, even with a moment from chapter 547 woven into the mix. Episode 29 is jaw-dropping. It's packed with new anime exclusive scenes, including 5 never-before-seen flashback sequences involving Ukitake's character. These flashbacks delve into several moments from Ukitake's life, from when he was 3 years old to his first meeting with Shunsui, all the way up until we see him mourning the death of head captain Yamamoto. So much additional context is given to us, which really adds a lot of depth and newfound appreciation for Ukitake's character, who was severely underutilized within the manga. Seeing the over 10 minutes of anime exclusive material that he received in this episode was truly mind-blowing, and it makes me overjoyed as a fan who has waited so long hoping that something like this would happen. In addition to these flashbacks, the episode takes some liberties with the pacing of events, as the second half sees a heavy restructuring of Ichigo and Yhwach's clash from chapter 615. The anime even gives us some new scenes with Yoruichi, Chad and Ganju as they attempt to hold off Yhwach. In my opinion, this was a great change from the manga, as we finally got to give Chad a much needed moment to shine. So there is no pre-intro sequence in this episode, and after the opening we get material adapted from chapter 616, and in addition to this we get some anime only reactions from Kiyone and Sentaro, the shared third seats of Squad 13, which expand upon a single panel in chapter 616 of Rukia just reacting to Ukitake's sacrifice. The first flashback of this episode expands upon a few panels from pages 9 to 10 of chapter 616. We see Ukitake's family take their young boy to the shrine of Mimihagi, and they are chanting and praying to the deity to save the boy, who was only 3 years old at the time. Ukitake's mother apologizes that she wasn't able to bring him into the world with good health. She cries as the young boy looks up and asks her why she is crying. Right at this moment, water pours from the eye of Mimihagi and it envelops Ukitake as he is transported to an otherworldly realm where the physical form of Mimihagi appears in front of him. Mimihagi has droplets of water or tears under its eye, which Ukitake gathers into his hand, and he then proceeds to drink it. A strange black Reiatsu appears and it transforms the young Ukitake into the black spiritual form of Mimihagi. He then transforms back, but he now notably has black hair, which then turns back to white when the black Reiatsu leaves him. We are then shown the title card for episode 29, The Dark Arm. Ukitake then sits up as his parents are surprised and overjoyed by his miraculous recovery. Ukitake narrates that on that stormy night, Mimihagi had saved his life, thus ending the first anime exclusive flashback sequence of this episode. The second anime exclusive flashback shows a young Ukitake who is slightly older here, and he is wandering the districts of Rukongai as he sees a thug troubling an old lady. Ukitake intervenes, telling the thug to calm down, as the lady gives the thug an uppercut and a swift punch to the gut, which brings the delinquent down to his knees. Ukitake checks if he is okay, saying that he told him to be calm because the old lady actually has a fearsome reputation. Ukitake offers the thug to join at the Shinigami Academy, saying that there are a lot of perks, like he'll be able to fight and earn money at the same time, but the thug declines his offer and pushes him back. But Ukitake proves just how strong he is even at this age by grabbing the thug's hand, neutralizing the push, and shaking his hand and squeezing it very tightly, introducing himself formally to him. The thug tells him to let go as he walks off, saying that he won't forget his face, and Ukitake cheerfully says likewise, waving goodbye to him. The last moment of this flashback showcases that Ukitake is still sick as he coughs up blood with a very concerned look on his face. The third anime exclusive flashback sequence begins with Shunsui in front of the gates of Muken, which open up as he tells Ukitake not to push himself too hard. Now, my favorite portion of this episode begins, and it is a flashback to the first formal meeting of Ukitake and Shunsui. They appear to be sparring together, with Sasakibe refereeing the fight, and a young Unohana along with a younger head captain Yamamoto who are spectating. When they clash, Unohana comments on their good technique, while a young Yamamoto who is a bit more harsh says that they are still inexperienced, but they show a lot of potential. So Ukitake jumps up in the air and he attempts to strike downward, but he coughs up blood as Shunsui blocks him and counters, pushing Ukitake back, who coughs up blood once again. They charge towards one another for a final clash, but but Sasakibe announces an end to the spar, and we see that both of their wooden katana have broken into two as they are pretty much evenly matched. They impress each other after this spar and they both introduce themselves, and it's revealed that they have seen each other in the same classes, but this is the first time that they have properly spoken to one another, learning each other's names. Ukitake says that there is actually something that he wants to ask Shunsui about. We cut to them leaving a sweet shop as Shunsui laughs, saying that he has been asked to introduce others to girls before, but this is the first time that he has been asked for a sweet shop recommendation. Shunsui understands why Ukitake has now been glaring at him in class. It's because he wants to try the sweets that Shunsui is always eating. Ukitake says that the sweets taste really good, and Shunsui clarifies that this is because there is alcohol in them. In a really funny moment, they are then suddenly ambushed by Ukitake's younger siblings as they discover the sweets, and Ukitake tries to stop them from having the alcohol-filled sweets, with Shunsui in the back saying what a mess of a situation. We then see the seasons change as their friendship grows over time, and this leads to Ukitake taking Shunsui to the shrine of Mimihagi one day. Shunsui states that he already knows information about Mimihagi from rumors that have circulated amongst the noble families, like how it is the right arm of the Soul King, which had fallen from the heavens a long time ago. Ukitake tries to share what had happened to him when he was younger, how Mimihagi had saved him, but Shunsui reveals that he already knows, as he noticed that Ukitake's health condition was not getting better, but it wasn't worsening either. Ukitake says that he survived, but his illness hasn't gone away, and he wonders if Shunsui is now going to stop him from joining the Gotei 13, but Shunsui says that he's not going to let him die that easily. The fourth anime exclusive flashback of this episode takes us a bit further into the future, with Ukitake, who is now a captain, and he is standing in front of the Central 46 as they comment on his poor health and why he needs to appoint himself a new lieutenant to the 13th Division. Now this scene is happening following the death of Kain Chiba, and Ukitake is struggling to accept that Kain's position can be replaced by another. The Central 46 explained that Ukitake's poor health is part of the reason why Kain had died, since his health had prevented him from intervening when he needed to. Ukitake reminds them that the Central 46 have said that it is up to the captain who they appoint as a lieutenant, and he tells them that he does not want a lieutenant at this time, going on to add that if he struggles to manage, then he may die soon anyway, and they can appoint a new captain who suits their needs better. This flashback explains the reason why Ukitake had waited until the 17-month time gap between the events of the Arrancar arc and the Fullbring arc to appoint a new lieutenant, who of course was Rukia Kuchiki. We then cut not too long after this as we see Shunsui commenting on Ukitake being pretty harsh with the Central 46. He explains how he would have wanted two lieutenants, but only if they were both cute girls. He then goes on to say that they should for now mourn the death of Kain, but he adds that Nanao has hidden all of the alcohol, but he has some of those alcohol-filled sweets that we had seen earlier, and he offers one to Ukitake, as this seems to cheer him up. We then cut to the fifth and final anime exclusive flashback sequence from this episode, which takes us further into the future, and this is following the death of head captain Yamamoto, and we see Ukitake, Shunsui and Unohana, who are gathered in front of the broken pieces of Ryujin Jaka as they mourn the death of Yamamoto. Shunsui struggles to accept Yamamoto's death, as he says that if he was still here, then he wouldn't have had to experience how difficult it is to be the one in command handing out instructions to others who rely on his sound judgment. This meeting is pretty much the final time that Shunsui and Ukitake see Unohana alive, as Shunsui struggles with the orders that he has had to give out. This alludes to the difficult decision that he has just made for Unohana to train Kinpachi, which he knows will end her life. With the burden of being head captain weighing heavily on his heart, he asks Ukitake and Unohana if he can have a moment to be alone. Following this, we see Ukitake and Unohana saying farewell to each other. This truly was a fantastic scene as they understand the severity of the situation and what needs to be done here. Here we see Unohana Retsu transform into Unohana Yachiru as her face drops and she now has this sinister expression. Ukitake says farewell to her as he tells her that they will meet again soon. We then cut to material from page 8 of chapter 547, and this is back when the Quincy had taken over the Serete, and it shows Ukitake at the shrine of Mimihagi as Kiyone and Sentaro call out to him. Ukitake at the shrine chanting to Mimihagi, then transitions seamlessly back into chapter 616 with him chanting Mimihagi, Mimihagi, open the power of your eye, the power of your eye lying in my organs, forsake my organs and open it. Now quite notably here there are a few cut pages pages from chapter 616, and this is Ukitake explaining what had happened to him when he was younger. Now, I'm guessing that this wasn't explained because we actually got to see the flashback sequence, but Ukitake says that when he was 3 years old, he was stricken with a serious case of consumption. His white hair is a side effect of this disease, as he alludes to the fact that some of them may have already known this, that he was supposed to die when he was aged 3. He then asks them whether if they have heard of Mimihagi, and Urahawa says just its name, as he knows that it was a god that was worshipped in the outskirts of eastern Rukongai. Ukitake says that Mimihagi is an indigenous heteromorphic cyclopean god who is worshipped in Sakahone of eastern Rukongai's 76th district. They say divine protection is brought to those who offer everything of themselves besides their eye to Mimihagi, and this god is said to be the enshrined right arm of the Soul King that had fell from the heavens long ago. Ukitake explains that his parents were superstitious people, and soon after the doctors had given up on him, they had taken him to the shrine of Mimihagi and they had began a prayer to offer up his lungs, and it was thanks to that he ended up surviving, and he had even gotten well enough to serve in the Gotei 13 as a Shinigami. Now, all of this is cut from the anime, as instead we adapt material from page 13 of chapter 616, where Ukitake coughs up blood and Rukia reacts and he tells her to be quiet. Now, the reason that these pages have been cut is that they've pretty much been explained to us within that first anime exclusive flashback sequence and the third one. In the first one, we see Ukitake's parents going through the process of trying to save Ukitake, and all of the exposition about Ukitake's condition is explained during his conversation with Shunsui during that flashback scene at the shrine of Mimihagi. I think that these flashback sequences are a much better way of explaining Ukitake's backstory than him just dropping a heavy exposition in the lab here. Then we have material from pages 8 and then 13 to 14 adapted into chapter 616. In the manga, Ukitake and Rukia have some dialogue with each other in chapter 616 before Mimihagi releases from Ukitake, and the anime actually expands upon this dialogue by giving some new lines to both of their characters, as Rukia asks if Ukitake dies, then what's going to happen to the 13th division? Ukitake apologizes to her, saying that he has caused her nothing but hardship. This leads to her thinking back to several memories of Ukitake, including her, Ukitake, and Kaien confronted by the Hollow Metastasia, and then when Ukitake appeared in front of Byakuya during her first escape attempt in the middle of the Soul Society arc, and then when Ukitake and Shunsui destroyed the Sokyoku when they had helped to rescue her. She then yells out to her captain as this amazing anime exclusive scene continues with Ukitake reminding her that there are two types of battles. This is an amazing callback to when Ukitake told Rukia to hold back and let Kaien fight Metastasia, where he had explained to her about the two kinds of battles, which are a battle to protect life and a battle to defend honor. Following this, we get another anime exclusive scene which expands upon a single panel from page 16 of chapter 616. And this is where Shunsui in Muken reacts to Ukitake's sacrifice. He elaborates upon Ukitake's comments on the two types of battles, which are a battle to protect life and a battle to defend honor, as he then wonders which type of battle is Ukitake fighting right now, before he calls out to Sosuke Aizen, and we cut to the mid-card of the episode. Now, this dialogue where he greets Aizen is heavily condensed within the anime. The cut stuff is mostly from page 16, as he says it's shaking, you can feel it even down here. The end is nearing for the Soul Society, and then he says, "You hear me, don't you?" This is as far as we innocent folks can go, as we can't get to the bottom of that darkness. So instead of all of this padded out greeting, the anime focuses on Shunsui calling out to Aizen, which faithfully adapts material from page 17 of chapter 616. The second half of the episode begins with material from page 9 of chapter 615 as Ichigo and Yhwach clash, and material is restructured heavily, as you can already tell, as we skip the goings on in the lab which happened from pages 10 to 13 of the same chapter, and for the most part a lot of this was adapted into last week's episode. Now, we do get some anime exclusive clashing here between Ichigo and Yhwach, as material is then adapted from pages 14 to 17 of chapter 615, and this is where Yhwach continues his explanation of how the Soul King was created to stabilize the Soul Society and the massive number of souls that passed through it. We know that episode 28 adapted Yoruichi's wire trap scene, which was restructured and inserted before the Soul King is even revealed to have been stabbed. But in the manga, this moment actually occurs right after Yhwach tells Ichigo in the manga that the collapse of the three realms and the Dangai will occur by his hands. Now, we do have an anime exclusive scene here which changes what happens in the manga, where Yoruichi tells Orihime that she is going to distract Yhwach as she tells her to try to use her powers to heal the Soul King. Yoruichi then rushes ahead and calls out to Chad and Ganju for help, and the three of them have an anime-only clash with Yuha, as Ganju punches the ground, creating a smoke screen which allows Chad to throw a punch against Yhwach. Yes, you heard that right, the anime is finally showing Chad some love, and Yoruichi follows up by firing her Hakuda technique Ryoken, but it seems like Yhwach has negated both of the attacks. So Orihime then attempts to heal the Soul King, and this is adapted from page 16 of chapter 615, and similar to the manga, her Sonten Keishun shatters as anime exclusive scenes are then mixed in with the manga content, as Yhwach effortlessly pushes back Yoruichi, Chad and Ganju. Following this blend of anime exclusive material, dialogue from page 17 of chapter 615 is then adapted when Yhwach mocks them for thinking that a human's power is enough to bring the Soul King back to life. Yhwach's speech then continues from the beginning of chapter 616 as we get more restructuring of the manga, with him explaining that it is impossible, they can no longer resurrect the Soul King. This is then blended with some anime only dialogue of Chad saying that the Soul King's power is fading, and Ganju also reacts asking what can they do now. We then jump to the beginning of chapter 617 when Ukitake is screaming as Mimihagi releases from his body. The anime shows us new material here where the black Reiatsu of Mimihagi covers Ukitake's body as Mimihagi rises towards the heavens. We continue to adapt material from chapter 617 here where Urahara reacts to the tremors having stopped. We then cut back to the royal palace from page 7 of chapter 617, but the noticeable difference is that Yoruichi's wire trap is not surrounding Yhwach, so instead we see the following panels of Ichigo and the others, as well as Yhwach reacting to Mimihagi holding the two pieces of the Soul King together. Now, dialogue which Yhwach says in page 9 of chapter 617 is reworked in the anime in order to build more tension, as we get a brief anime only scene here where Yoruichi notices that Yhwach wasn't able to foresee Mimihagi commenting on his surprised reaction to its sudden appearance. We then are shown Yhwach's eye as he comments on how Mimihagi's appearance was not reflected in his vision of the future. Now, the next few manga panels are cut here, and this is when Yhwach calls out to Mimihagi, referring to it as the Soul King. Why is the right arm of the Soul King getting in the way? As he questions whether if it has grown a sudden attachment to the Soul Society, which it has been protecting. We then see a close-up of Mimihagi's eye in the manga and it's squinting as Yhwach demands an answer from it. Now, with how much of the manga material is being reworked and restructured, I think that the dialogue from these panels is most likely going to be adapted into next week's episode of the anime, because it's very purposeful that these 5 panels from chapter 617 were omitted, as the anime literally cuts to that manga panel following this dialogue. Material from page 11 of chapter 617 is adapted, with Soifon raising the point that Ukitake is not a perfect replacement for the Soul King, stating that the stability of the realms is tied to the life of Ukitake. When Urahara says that they must find a way to stabilize the Soul Society, we then cut to material that wasn't adapted from last week's episode, and this is heavily reworked into this one. So it does seem like the anime has actually cut out all of the light-hearted banter from chapter 612 with Soifon, Yushiro and the others, as in this episode Yushiro appears here telling them that the preparations for the Tenchi Heso are complete. Now, Urahara in the anime isn't as confident as he says that they don't have enough Reiatsu for what they are planning. The anime hasn't really revealed Urahara's plan yet, but from the manga we already know that his plan is to storm the royal palace. This was revealed way earlier on in chapter 612. What is interesting is that in the manga, Urahara has everyone, including the Vizards and Ukitake, pour their Reiatsu into the orbs, and this actually begins to create a portal to the royal palace. Now, this is before Ukitake's sacrifice, and we actually see the formation of the gate to the royal palace in page 6 of chapter 614. So because none of this happens and the Vizards haven't arrived yet, all of this actually conflicts with the material from pages 14 to 17 of chapter 617, which is the reason why it's been omitted. So what happens is that they all react to the gate disappearing following Ukitake's sacrifice, as Nanao says that there's not enough spiritual pressure. She explains that Captain Ukitake has always had to sustain his debilitated body with his spiritual pressure, so for that reason no other captain's spiritual pressure levels come close to Ukitake's. now that he's no longer supporting the gate to the royal palace, they don't have enough spiritual pressure to create it. She starts to panic as she goes on to contemplate what's gonna happen, as Lisa then intervenes to calm down Nanao, saying that they'll just need to do something about it, they'll find a way out of the situation. The Vizards ask Urahara to pass them some orbs so that they can contribute their spiritual pressure to the formation of the gate, and then we also see Mayuri arrive, who says that he had come because he was summoned, only to find them doing as they please in somebody else's lab. So Mayuri tuts at Urahara as he says that they needed vast amounts of spiritual pressure. Why didn't they just use the spiritual pressure amplifier that he's created? Urahara says he wishes that he had told him that earlier, as Mayuri apologizes, saying that he didn't anticipate that such a situation would happen. Thanks to the amplifier, the gate is properly created, as Hisagi and the others are overjoyed as they say that they can now go to the royal palace. I do think that we are going to be getting a big segment within the anime where all of these omitted lab sequences are going to be included in a future episode. This includes Kinpachi's appearance, which was omitted from chapter 613, the Vizards turning up from the beginning of chapter 614, Urahara updating everybody on the current situation, giving a status report of the Gotei 13 from chapter 612, and then this material from chapter 617 which was omitted, where it shows Mayuri appearing, explaining the situation with the spiritual pressure amplifier as they create the gate to the royal palace. So I think that all of this is going to be streamlined into one of the segments in the upcoming episodes, and it just goes to show how much is being changed and altered from the manga, and honestly it is difficult to keep track of, but I think that we're managing okay for now. The final part of the episode before we cut to the credits adapts Shunsui's exchange with Aizen inside of Muken, and this is mostly adapting manga material from chapters 617 and 618. We begin with material from page 13 of chapter 617 as we continue to adapt the exchange, as material from the very end of chapter 617 is then adapted. Then following this we get content from pages 1 to 8 of chapter 618, and again this is all faithfully adapted into the final few minutes of the episode, with the final lines of dialogue being ripped right out of the manga as Aizen wonders if he wants to breathe the air of the pitiful soul society which is about to be crushed by Yhwach. Now episode 29 ends here as we cut to the credits, and there is no post-credit scene this week. Similar to last week, because of how much material is being reworked from the manga, there are still some omissions from the manga which may or may not be adapted into future episodes, so I think that they are worth mentioning here. This is content from pages 2 to 3 of chapter 616. So we see Keigo and Mizuhiro reacting to the tremors. A couple of these manga panels with the two of them was adapted into episode 28, and it also included Tatsuki, and a heavy emphasis was placed upon the soul tickets too in this scene. The rest of the content here is basically all of Yhwach's underlings reacting to the collapse of the realms, as these sold out react to Yhwach abandoning them, and we even get to see a couple of manga panels of Baz B reacting to the tremors. Now, a couple of panels of dialogue from Renji are cut from chapter 615, and this is prior to Ukitake announcing that he's going to replace the Soul King, so this stuff is not going to be adapted, as he says that the Soul King's dead, exclaiming that the Soul Society and the world of the living are really going to disappear. He says to himself, what do we do? Isn't there something that we can do? This then leads into Ukitake looking ominously, and it's literally the dialogue that's said right before Ukitake announces his sacrifice. So yeah, these few lines of dialogue from Renji in the manga have been cut. Just like last week's episode, the restructuring of events here made it challenging to keep track of the manga's original flow versus the anime's changes. Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 29 continues to alter the 1000 Year Blood War arc, and with the amount of new content that's being added, it's clear that this adaptation is more of a reimagining than a direct adaptation of the manga. The inclusion of 5 anime original flashbacks which dive deep into Ukitake's past is a dream come true for fans who had wanted more depth from his character. These scenes, paired with the restructuring of the battle between Ichigo and Yhwach and the addition of new moments with Chad, Yoruichi and Ganju, made for an engaging episode that felt both familiar but still very new at the same time. There were a few moments that were cut or reworked from the manga, but overall the changes continue to enhance the story and the characters, adding emotional weight and new context that wasn't present within the manga. With so much happening, it feels like the anime is building towards something even greater, making it a very exciting time to be a Bleach fan. Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 30, titled The Betrayer, is unlike any other episode of the anime. This week's episode had over 12 minutes of anime exclusive scenes which were weaved into manga content from chapters 618 to 620. We even ended the episode with a post-credit scene that included a manga panel from chapter 626, which had really taken me by surprise. Now, I was really happy that this episode started by adapting some panels of the manga from chapter 617, which were left out from last week's episode. In addition to being faithful to the manga, there are so many additions in this latest episode, like the proper extended fight sequence between Ichigo and Uryu, and we don't just get a few clashes here, their fight actually has tons of new anime exclusive dialogue that isn't in the manga, and we even get our first look at Uryu's holy form, something that also wasn't shown in the manga. The new scenes involving Uryu really conveyed his motivations and his reasoning for following Yhwach, and it convinces us of his motives and his role as the betrayer. Orihime, Ganju and Chad, the dangerous trio who were sidelined in the manga, also got a lot more screen time this week as we saw several original scenes of them confronting the Schutzstaffel. This episode also featured new scenes of Squad 12 and Urahara commenting on the situation, with reactions from the Shinigami at the lab who are concerned about Ukitake. As you can tell, there is so much for us to talk about with this latest episode of Bleach, so be sure to stick around until the very end of the video because there are some major changes with the sequence of events in this episode which may impact the next two episodes of the anime. Episode 30 begins with recapping adapting content from chapter 616 and 617, which was adapted into last week's episode. Now, a few panels which were not adapted in episode 29 have been included in the recap of this episode, and this is dialogue from page 10 of chapter 617 where Yhwach questions why the right arm of the Soul King is getting in the way. Following the opening, we get content from page 9 of chapter 618 which is adapted, and there's also this anime exclusive edition of Yhwach releasing this dark, ominous spiritual pressure which paralyzes everybody with fear. Now, we can't confirm whether if this is a new ability from Yhwach or if it's just him releasing his spiritual pressure. So there is a brief anime only moment here where Yhwach clashes with Mimihagi, with Ichigo telling him to stop, and then Yoruichi says some dialogue here from page 12 which is a bit later in the chapter, and this is rearranged and said earlier in this moment. In the anime she says it right before Ichigo and Yhwach clash, while in the manga it is after they clash and right before she uses the talismans. Now, the anime has an incredible exclusive scene here where Ichigo utilizes his own Blutveen in order to break free from Yhwach's control. This inclusion highlights that Ichigo does have control over his Quincy powers. Then following this, pages 10 to 13 of chapter 618 are faithfully adapted into the anime. Yoruichi uses sealing talismans here to maintain the existence of the Soul King, and we learn more about the 3 talismans that she uses via the mid-card of the episode. Yoruichi has some anime original dialogue here where she tells Ichigo not to let Yhwach get close to the Soul King. The dialogue between Yhwach and Ichigo from chapter 618 pages 12 to 14 was actually adapted earlier into episode 28, and this is before the Soul King was actually killed in the anime, and they included all of this dialogue here during an anime exclusive fight scene between Ichigo and Yhwach. Pages 14 to 15 of chapter 618 are slightly changed in the anime. The manga has Ichigo fire a Getsuga Tensho at Yhwach, and the smoke clears to see that he is unscathed. The anime, on the other hand, alters this by having Yhwach immediately counter the Getsuga Tensho, as Ichigo is hit before the Getsuga can be fired. Yoruichi, who is maintaining the seal on the Soul King, has some new dialogue here where she tells Yhwach that too bad the future that he foresaw will not come to pass. There are a few cut pages from the manga, and these are pages 15 to 17 of chapter 618. So here Ichigo is speaking to Yhwach, saying that he had told him that his blood is in him, but he clarifies that he is not going to allow Yuha to control his body because of this. Yuha explains whether or not if Ichigo will do as he wishes is entirely up to the eyes that he possesses. Pages 1 to 5 of chapter 619 are also cut, and it's more dialogue between Ichigo and Yhwach as it picks up from where we had left off, as he explains that he has never once thought of controlling Ichigo in order to do his bidding. Yuha explains that this is because he didn't need to. Ichigo will automatically do whatever Yuha wants because his will is connected to Yuha's will. So in the manga, Yubaka explains that Ichigo has always been fighting for him. The battles that he fought which had awakened his powers in a Shinigami were so that he would elevate his abilities. This elevated power had allowed Ichigo to defeat Sasuke Aizen, and then he regained the powers that he had lost from defeating Aizen, all for the sake of being able to take the life of the Soul King in front of Yhwach. Yoruichi tells Ichigo not to listen to him, as Yuha explains that without even having to think, everything is reflected in his eyes, as he sees Ichigo fighting for him, explaining that no matter what he thinks, every single thing that Ichigo does is for Yhwach's gain, all because they have the same blood flowing through them. Now, the rest of chapter 619 is faithfully adapted into the anime, spanning from pages 5 to 17, with the anime reworking the first page of chapter 620 into the end of material from chapter 619. This is where Ganju loses his footing and Chad saves him, and Pernida jumps from the crumbling ground that it was standing on. We then get new dialogue which expands content from the beginning of chapter 620, with Uryu telling Ichigo and the others not to interfere with Yhwach, and Ichigo asking what is he doing. Then we get content from pages 2 to 7 of chapter 620 adapted. Then following this, we get an anime exclusive tense confrontation between Ichigo and Uryu as the music wells up, and there's new dialogue here that wasn't in the manga, as Uryu tells Ichigo that if he wants to kill Yhwach, then he'll have to kill him first. We then return to manga material from page 7 of chapter 620. This is where Lil, Askin and Gerard arrive, and Chad, Orihime and Ganju ready themselves to fight. There is also some new dialogue here from Pernida, who is present, and Pernida was actually not shown to confront Chad and the others in the manga, as it tells them not to underestimate the Schutzstaffel, as they are strong enough to take on 1,000 opponents. Ganju has new dialogue here where he tells Chad and Orihime to get ready to battle the Schutzstaffel. Now, there's new dialogue here because these characters were pretty much off-screened in the manga, but the anime actually is giving them some screen time in this episode. So after the Schutzstaffel arrive to confront the three of them, Uryu actually has a manga panel cut from page 8 of chapter 620, and this is where he says that he doesn't need help from the Schutzstaffel. In the manga, Ichigo vs Uryu was really anticlimactic. Uryu simply fires several arrows at the ground near Ichigo, and he and the others fall from the royal palace. However, the anime takes the opportunity to showcase an original fight between them here, which expands upon the manga panels from pages 8 to 9 of chapter 620. The anime original fight begins with Ichigo deflecting several arrows, then jumping up to strike down towards Uryu, who evades the attack. There is some absolutely stunning animation here, with Ichigo swinging his sword and Uryu evading the attack by ducking. Uryu then fires an arrow at Ichigo here from his hand and his foot, as Ichigo notices that he is generating these arrows without a bow. Uryu is then truly on an offensive as he fires Licht Regen while Ichigo is evading the attacks, and we then have a very fascinating addition to the anime where Ichigo is actually hit with an arrow, but his Blut Veen protects him, and this is where Uryu realizes that Ichigo can use Blut, and he is shocked, and this is our first ever glimpse of Uryu realizing that Ichigo is a Quincy. While he is stunned, Ichigo strikes him down, pointing his blade at him, as he then grabs him, telling him to snap out of it. Uryu says that Ichigo had the perfect opportunity to just kill him now, but he didn't. Ichigo tries to remind him about how he had once said that Shinigami and Quincy can coexist, but Uryu explains some reasoning behind his betrayal which wasn't in the manga, as he reiterates that he is a Quincy, as he says that there is no need for Shinigami in this world, as he then activates his Volstandig. Now, this is the very first time that we are seeing Uryu's holy form, and this was not shown to us in the manga. Uryu's wings are thin, refined, and they have this amazing pattern, and he has glowing armor like reishi on both of his arms and his legs, and a pattern which is resembling the end of a Quincy arrow over his heart. Looking at Uryu's holy form, it is so well designed, as Uryu here states that this is his resolve as he summons countless arrows to circle around him while he is in the air above Ichigo. The second half of this episode is almost entirely made up of anime original material, as we begin with an original scene from the lab where Ukitake's body is disturbingly shaking with Mimihagi pouring out of him. In this scene, the Squad 12 members are getting alerts from the Shutara scale as Hiyosu tells Akon that it's getting unstable. They wonder if there is another anomaly, but they detect no fluctuations causing an imbalance of souls. Urahara says that the alert that they are getting is not linked to an imbalance of souls from the three realms. He elaborates that he had heard that Mimihagi governs over stillness, and this may be the reason why the tremors have stopped and the worlds are not falling apart anymore. He does warn them that despite the right arm of the Soul King being involved, its power is linked to Ukitake's life via the Kamikake ritual. The burden of taking the place of the Soul King must be unimaginable for Ukitake, as he then says that they must hurry. The anime-only scene provides a lot of context for the critical role that Ukitake is playing, as it adds a lot more depth to his sacrifice. The anime original fight between Ichigo and Uryu continues, and we see Hashward observing Uryu's newly awakened Volstandig. Ichigo is shocked by Uryu's change of appearance as he reveals that this is his new power called his Holy Form. He then fires these reishi projectiles which take on a similar shape to his wings, which look like the ends of an arrow with needle-like points which emerge from the edge, and they fire charged reishi towards Ichigo. Now this is some really intense clashing here as Ichigo deflects several of Uryu's attacks, but they eventually overwhelm him, knocking one of his swords out of his hand. Ichigo then takes to the sky as Uryu prepares to continue his attack. Like I mentioned earlier, Ganju, Chad and Orihime were off-screened in the manga, but the anime has several new scenes involving them here. Firstly, we have Ganju use Senpen Banka, a distraction technique where he sets off multiple fireworks to create a smokescreen. Gerard retaliates, but Orihime blocks the attack with his shield, protecting Ganju. Chad then uses his left arm of the devil, but it literally does nothing more than blow a gust of wind towards the Schutzstaffel. While Askin and Lil insult their efforts, Ganju uses Renkan Seppa Sen, which allows him to transform anything that he touches into sand. Ganju had first used this way back in chapter 87, so it's great to see him use this technique again. He actually manages to make the Schutzstaffel fall from the royal palace, but they return by using their Volstandig to fly back up and laugh in their faces. Now Lil Barrow does give them credit for thinking their strategy through, with Askin adding that if this is all of the strength that they have, then they are in serious trouble. We then have a few manga panels adapted from pages 12 to 13 of chapter 620, where Yhwach approaches the Soul King, touching the crystalline structure, but Mimihagi appears clashing with Yhwach. Now we cut briefly back to the lab for an anime original scene of Rukia saying that Ukitake is still fighting. Sentaro asks in frustration if there is anything that they can do to help him, as Isane tries to intervene, yelling that Ukitake can't go any further, but Kiyone stops her. The anime does a fantastic job of showing us Mimihagi's last stand as it tries its very best to protect the Soul King one last time. The anime exclusive fight between Ichigo and Uryu continues as Uryu's projectiles follow Ichigo through the air like homing missiles. Uryu says that he should just give up because he can't defeat him. There is some important new dialogue exchanged here which adds so much missing context which wasn't in the manga. Ichigo refuses to accept Uryu's reasoning that he has turned his back on them because he is a Quincy. Uryu says that he doesn't need his acceptance, as Ichigo asks is that a good enough reason to want to kill him. Uryu elaborates that his mentor Soken Ishida had taught him that it was possible for Shinigami and Quincy to understand each other. There was even a time where he had thought that this was true, but then he realized that this was a mistake. We then get flashbacks of the anime original scenes from Cour 1 of Uryu reading his grandfather's journal. He explains that the grudge started 1,000 years ago, and the sealed Quincy King had waited for the right moment to return. Now meanwhile, the surviving Quincy were massacred by the Shinigami, including his grandfather. Uryu states that it is always the Quincy who end up shedding blood. He affirms his resolve by revealing that he will not forgive those who have taken everything from him. He then goes on to trap Ichigo in a cage of reishi and he detonates it, and this exchange of dialogue here has done so much to improve the role of Uryu's character during this arc, in comparison to how he was portrayed within the manga, and I'm so happy that these additions are being made here via these new lines of dialogue. So the episode then begins to wrap up as we cut to more anime original content featuring Chad and the others, as Gerard asks them if they are going to attack, attack, with him confidently offering to wipe all of them out on his own. Chad summons his right arm of the giant, charging at the Quincy, who ends up swatting him away as Chad flies into Orihime and Ganju, and that's pretty much the last that we see of them in this episode. The final moments of Ichigo's anime exclusive fight with Uryu then unfold as Uryu says that he will end this, stating that here is his resolve as he draws his bow ready to fire at Ichigo. He then asks Ichigo where is his pride. Ichigo then fires a Getsuga Jujisho at Uryu, who also fires an attack back, and the Getsuga overpowers Uryu's attack, but it fires away from him. It seems like Ichigo had diverted the trajectory of the attack, as Uryu calls him naive for not having the resolve to hurt him directly. We then briefly cut back to Yhwach and Mimihagi, and this clash is again expanding upon a few panels from page 13 of chapter 620, as we also see a glimpse of the Soul King here too. The final scene of Ichigo and Uryu's fight ends with Uryu saying that he won't let Ichigo kill Yhwach, as he shoots down Ichigo, literally taking a chunk out of his body, leaving him to fall down from the royal palace. This scene here actually alters events from pages 10 to 11 of chapter 620. So in the manga, Uryu destroys the surface that Ichigo is standing on as he falls, and it is Lil Barrow who fires an attack which hits Ichigo while he is falling. Now, because this doesn't happen in the anime, this entire exchange between Lil and Uryu is not adapted into the anime. In the manga, it was portrayed as though Uryu was showing mercy to Ichigo by only having him fall from the royal palace, but then Lil had intervened in order to deliver a killing blow. This exchange also had undertones of Lil commenting on Uryu's softness for not finishing the job. Lil comments on how Uryu had probably thought that Ichigo wouldn't survive the fall, and even if he does survive, Ichigo won't have any way of getting back up here. Lil says that there is no need to consider Ichigo finding a way to return if they kill him before he falls. Before cutting to the credits, the first half of page 12 of chapter 620 is adapted, where Gerard laughs and congratulates Uryu, saying that they have now accepted him as one of their own. The anime has an addition here where the camera pans in on Hashwald's face, who, as we know, was observing the entire fight against Ichigo, and the episode then cuts to the credits. Now, there is a post-credit scene in this week's episode, and this is a very short scene which alters a lot of the order of events, and it begins with showing us Ukitake's convulsing body, and the rest of page 13 and 14 of chapter 620 is adapted here. In the anime, it seems like Yhwach had ripped apart Mimihagi into two pieces, while in the manga he absorbs it into his hand. We then get an anime original scene of Ukitake's body after the defeat of Mimihagi, as everyone at the lab realizes that it's the end for him. The anime then deviates from the manga here as we have a shocking anime original scene with new dialogue, as Yhwach says that the role of his father has ended and he will now reclaim the world and build it anew, telling the Schutzstaffel to offer up everything that they have as they send their reishi to Yhwach, who uses his sword to now cut the seal of the Soul King, destroying the casing housing the Soul King, as we then see the two parts of the Soul King's body float up in the air. The anime expands on a single manga panel from page 16 of chapter 620, and this is where Yhwach explains that he will take everything from the Soul King. The anime adds new dialogue explaining how he will restore the world to how it should be, as Yhwach begins absorbing the Soul King, and from this post-credit scene, it seems like the absorption of the Soul King is a much faster process than how it happens within the manga. The episode ends as we cut to a panel from chapter 626 of Yhwach revealing his new form after having completely absorbed the Soul King, as he awakens these multiple eyes on his head. Now, this is different to the manga because in that gap between chapters 621 to 626, Yhwach was actually still absorbing the Soul King, and it wasn't a quick process. The Shinigami were in the Serete and they had time to prepare to go to the royal palace, and the Schutzstaffel members also had some downtime. The anime must be just showing us a preview of Yhwach's Soul King absorbed form, and we may still be getting this break where Yhwach takes his time to absorb the Soul King. Due to how much stuff is being reworked within the anime, there are some cuts which have been left which may or may not be adapted into future episodes, and I think that they are worth mentioning here. So in the manga, in pages 15 to 17 of chapter 620, before Yhwach starts absorbing the Soul King, he states that he will put a lid on the Serete so that nothing can get in his way while he devours the Soul King. I do think that this may be adapted into the start of episode 31. What they may do is add these unadapted scenes at the start of the next episode while showing a brief recap of episode 30. And this is exactly what they had done at the beginning of this episode, where they adapted dialogue from chapter 617, which wasn't included in episode 29. Now, additionally, we know that episode 32 is titled The Holy Newborn, and this was from a post that was made by Kubo on his official fan club earlier this year. So content where we see the Schutzstaffel waiting for Yhwach to absorb the Soul King from chapters 625 to 626 may well be adapted into episode 32. This week's episode of Bleach was really intense, and I wasn't prepared for how much new material that we received, which expanded upon the source material. Episode 30 showed us battles that were off-screened in the manga, we had unrevealed character motivations, as well as a new transformation in the form of Uryu's Volstandig. With over 12 minutes of anime original content, it really is going to be difficult to beat this episode. Uryu's betrayal in the anime is very convincing. How he speaks about Ichigo's naive nature, his resolve to kill Ichigo versus Ichigo's mercy and his softness is perfectly portrayed here, as seeing Ichigo fall down to the Serite with that fatal wound was truly shocking. Then following this, we see the Soul King being absorbed by Yhwach, ending the episode on a solid cliffhanger for this week. The anime has done so much for Uryu's character to solidify his identity as a Quincy and his reasoning for aligning with Yhwach. This episode has given us more depth than ever before by also referencing the original scenes of Uryu reading the journal from Cour 1. I really do think that Uryu has joined the side of the Quincy here, and there is something that's going to happen later on where he realizes that he is in the wrong. But for now, his betrayal has definitely convinced me, and he has done way more than he had ever done within the manga. Also, I did love the inclusion of Orihime, Chad and Ganju getting new material. Even if the end result was the same, it still was nice to see them in action rather than them just being sidelined. Ukitake's sacrifice also has been handled exceptionally well in this anime adaptation. In the manga, Ukitake does the ritual, then we don't really see him again, and nobody reacts to his death or the fall of Mimihagi either. But the anime really did justice to his character here by showing reactions from people in the lab and seeing his body in several scenes as he struggles with the task of replacing the Soul King. Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 31, titled Against the Judgment, adapts a lot of manga material as we go back and adapt material from several chapters that was not adapted into earlier episodes. For the most part, the episode focuses on adapting material from chapters 621 to 624, with some anime exclusive scenes that weave in manga content from chapters 612 to 614, and even some stuff from chapter 617. There are a lot of changes in this episode, like Hashwald's dialogue explaining the Black Torrent emerging from Yhwach being given to Aizen, and we also get new information about the Black Creatures, which is revealed during the mid-card of the episode. We also have an entire scene involving Kon from chapter 624, which is reworked into a new anime original scene at the end of the episode. Now, the first half of the episode stays on track and faithfully adapts manga content up to the end of chapter 623. However, the second half reworks and restructures a lot of manga content in order to fit into the continuity of events of chapter 624, which is really interesting to see. I am honestly impressed with all of the changes here, as it has resulted in several anime original moments for Shunsui, including an amazing speech that he makes to rally the Shinigami as they prepare to storm the royal palace. Now, be sure to stick around until the very end of this video, as I'll be discussing this week's post-credit scene, which has resulted in some scenes involving the Schutzstaffel being cut from the anime. The episode begins by adapting all of chapter 621 before the opening song, but there are some notable differences. So the first two pages of chapter 621 are not adapted in this episode, and this is where Mimihagi disappears and Ukitake's body collapses. Now we see Ukitake's body still releasing Mimihagi later in the episode, which means that Mimihagi and Ukitake appear to still be alive. So these pages from the beginning of chapter 621 may well be adapted into next week's episode. Pages 7 to 9 of the chapter are also not adapted, and this is where the Black Creatures release from Yhwach and they pour past the Schutzstaffel, who begin to panic. But Hashwald explains that they are a torrent of the Soul King's power, which was released from the Shinigami seal. The unstoppable torrent is passing through Yhwach's body, Shinigami and is headed for their enemy the Shinigami, as Hashward reassures them that the creatures will not harm the Quincy. Now the details explained here are instead relayed to us via the mid-card of the episode, and some of Hashward's dialogue is given to Aizen later in the episode too. Following this, some material has been condensed and reworked into the anime, like these manga panels from page 11 of chapter 621, where Soifon is seen to react to the black mass which is surrounding the Serete's canopy. All of this has been reworked. In the manga, she explains how the hole within the barrier is a prime target for the enemy as she rushes to deal with it. The anime reworks this by including the other Shinigami via some anime exclusive scenes. The first scene is where the black creatures fall from the royal palace and we see Renji react, and then Ikkaku explains that something is coming inside the Serete through the hole in the barrier. Soifon says that the Serete is being sealed off, which is dialogue that some random Shinigami yell earlier on in the manga chapter. Also in the manga, Soifon scolds Omaida, telling him she is going to destroy the protective barrier before she activates her Bankai. We then see that she is overwhelmed and then she is rescued by Omaida, who she yells at again for being too slow. All of this is cut from the anime, which only shows her activating her Bankai and then being overwhelmed by the torrent of energy. Now, following Soifon's Bankai activation, we see new content with the Shinigami around the Serete trying to escape the creatures. This new material is mixed in with manga content from pages 14 to 15 of chapter 621, where Ikkaku, Yumichika and Hisagi fend off the creatures with their Shikai. We also get a new scene here of Hisagi holding one of these black creatures, and we see its teeth as he explains that it is biting him. The anime then cuts a manga panel of dialogue from Ikkaku, who comments on how the torrent of black creatures is endless and how at this rate they will never get around to destroying the canopy. The rest of the chapter is faithfully adapted into the episode as Aizen arrives and crushes the creatures, making his smug remark before we cut to the opening song. After the opening, we begin with material from chapter 622 with Aizen congratulating Rukia on becoming a lieutenant. This chapter is adapted faithfully into the anime, aside from the last page where there are some alterations. In the anime, after Aizen releases his spiritual pressure to destroy the canopy, there is some cut content where Rukia tells him to stop as the spiritual pressure the Shinigami have collected is being scattered. In the manga, the Shinigami have already started creating the gate, but in the anime they haven't. The anime alters this by giving some of Hashwald's dialogue from chapter 621 to Aizen, as Aizen explains the black creatures as being an overflow of Yhwach's power after absorbing the Soul King, adding that Yhwach's spiritual pressure has changed and it will take time for the Quincy King to suppress the power of the Soul King. In the manga, Rukia's concerns about the stability of the gate that they are creating leads to Aizen saying that he will shoot down the royal palace. However, in the anime, Rukia asks Urahara about a way to reach the royal palace as Aizen interrupts with his dialogue from the end of chapter 622. Material from chapter 623 begins to be adapted when Aizen releases his spiritual pressure into the sky, aiming to shoot down the royal palace. Following this, Mayuri returns to the story after Shunsui calls out to him, marking his first appearance in Cour 3, which adapts material from page 5 of chapter 623. In the manga, he actually appeared earlier in chapter 617, offering his Reiatsu amplification device for Urahara to use. This was also while Shunsui was still in Muken releasing Aizen, and while Mimihagi had just been released. A panel of exposition from Mayuri about his invention is cut from page 6 of chapter 623. Here he explains that a Shinigami's spiritual pressure is an eternal flowing spring, and as long as their heart continues beating, it is impossible to stop that flow without stopping their heart, adding that all of the prisoners within Muken cannot be killed for one reason or another, and nobody in the Soul Society is able to stop their hearts. Now, this dialogue is cut from the anime. Following this, a panel of dialogue is cut from page 7 of chapter 623, and this is where Aizen reiterates some of Mayuri's explanation as he comments on how Mayuri is controlling the level of his restraint with his gadget. Shunsui's dialogue from page 11 of chapter 623 is altered in the anime, and again this is because of the anime changing the sequence of events around the gate to the royal palace. So the anime here has Shunsui give Urahara the order to create a gate to the royal palace for the the Shinigami, while he and the others confront the Sternritter who have just appeared. In the manga, however, Shunsui asks Nanao about the status of the gate, and we know in the manga, Urahara revealed that he was working on the gate in chapter 614. This was before Ukitake's sacrifice, and he had began work on the gate without being ordered to do so by Shunsui. Nanao reveals to Shunsui in the manga that they have to start over with gathering their spiritual pressure for the gate because it has been scattered. Shunsui then orders Urahara to handle the gate while they focus on the enemy. Lil Toto gets new dialogue in the anime where she tells the Shinigami that they will honor a temporary ceasefire and they won't interfere with them, and they won't let the other Sternritter in the royal palace interfere with them either. This replaces a manga panel where Basby offers to help them build the gate to the royal palace. We reach the midpoint of the episode after material from the end of chapter 623 is adapted, and this is where Basby says that they are going to kill Yhwach for abandoning them. The second half of the episode features a lot of reworked manga material as we begin with an extended teaser of Grimmjow in front of a closed Garganta. This is adapted from a few manga panels from pages 6 to 7 of chapter 624. We then have a 5-minute anime exclusive scene which includes new content as well as reworked manga material which wasn't adapted into earlier episodes. So this begins with Shunsui calling out to all of the Shinigami, ordering them to return to the lab. Now this is reworking material from page 9 of chapter 612. This is where Shinji tells Renji that Urahara had sent out an order asking all captains and lieutenants to return to the lab. The anime is once again continuing this trend of expanding upon Shunsui's role, giving him more new scenes as we see him fulfilling the duties of a captain commander. And this is something that was lacking within the manga. Akon tells Shunsui that they are ready to send out the order to everyone on the battlefield. He then picks up a flip phone device and sends out the order that all Gotei 13 Shinigami who are able to move need to gather at the lab immediately. We then see several anime exclusive scenes of Shinigami reacting to the order as they struggle to return because of their injuries. This includes a exclusive scene involving Afro Shinigami Zenosuke Kuromadani who is helping somebody up. We then get a brief scene of Mayuri raising a platform from the ground, and this is his Reiatsu amplification device from chapter 617. Now he does this during a montage scene, so all of the back and forth that he has with Urahara from the manga is not included here. This is followed by more anime exclusive material which features Ryunosuke helping Shino, as Ryunosuke says that he is able to walk without help. Shunsui reveals his plan to borrow everyone's spiritual energy in order to create a gate to the royal palace. Now I do find it funny how this one anime exclusive scene has magically fixed all of the omissions and reworked content from earlier episodes, as there was a lot of stuff from chapters 612 to 614 which wasn't adapted, because now Kinpachi has arrived on the battlefield and content from chapter 613 is being adapted. So instead of him coming out of the treatment room, he abruptly appears here in the anime, and Urahara doesn't stop him leaving with a Kido barrier when he wants to look for Yachiru. So Nanao does appear, and we get pages 8 to 9 of chapter 613 adapted as she convinces him to stay and to let the other Shinigami look for Yachiru. The anime original content continues as Shunsui delivers a moving speech to the gathered Shinigami, with even the Sternritter there listening. He is rallying the troops here, getting them ready for a final confrontation with Yhwach and the Quincy. He emphasizes that reality is facing destruction and they don't know the status of Ichigo and the others or Squad Zero. Despite this, their goal is to stop Yhwach. It is time to put their differences aside and to fight for the sake of the world. He says that there is no future for the Gotei 13 if they don't put their lives on the line to protect the world here. After Shunsui's speech, Urahara takes the stage and some dialogue from pages 5 to 6 of chapter 614 is reworked and included here, as Urahara explains to everyone gathered that they will create a gate that directly connects them to the royal palace from here. Now following this, the manga content featuring the Vizards from pages 1 to 5 of chapter 614 is adapted into the anime. Okay, so after this 5-minute anime exclusive scene, we return to material from the beginning of chapter 624 with Aizen recovering from Nanana's attack. We then have an anime exclusive scene showing the formation of the gate for the first time in the anime. Urahara then says some of his dialogue from chapter 614 which wasn't adapted into earlier episodes, as he speaks about how they can use the gate thanks to Ichigo, who has broken the barriers appears between the royal palace and the Soul Society. We continue with unadapted material from this chapter as Urahara warns them about the risk of not being able to return. Because in the manga this happens before Ukitake's sacrifice, Ukitake's dialogue in the anime is instead given to Rukia, who explains to Urahara that Soifon's emotional outburst is because they all feel the same way. They want to protect the Gote 13. Material from chapter 614 ends after Kinpachi's comments, and we see this scene of the Vizards wearing their Shinigami Shihakusho. We then seamlessly cut back to material from chapter 624, and I'm genuinely impressed with how well everything is flowing, as we have Aizen comment on the Shinigami and Quincy working together, as he then comments on how insufferable Ichigo continues to be for him as he has entered the royal palace before him. The episode then adapts the second half of chapter 624 as we cut to Ichigo and the others, and this is reworked in the anime with some anime exclusive material. So let's first go over how the manga handles this. So Ichigo wakes up with Yoruichi kicking him in the back as he wonders why he was the only one who has passed out, as he then remembers what had happened to him. In the manga, Ichigo grabbed the arrow that was fired at him while he was falling and he shattered it with his hand. Orihime had then used Santan Keshun to grab Ichigo, Chad, Ganju and herself as they rapidly fall from the greater palace. Yoruichi is then seen as she pierces the Santan Keshun in order to pull them up. Now suddenly Kon appears in his muscular form, causing Ichigo to bang his head against Orihime's head, thus knocking him out. As we then learn that Kon has been hiding under Ichigo's Shinigami robe this entire time. Ichigo then grabs Kon and insults him as he threatens to transform into his muscular mode to beat him up. The anime reworks all of this as Ichigo gets up yelling Uryu's name. Orihime is thankful that he is okay as she collapses on him, saying that she is a bit hungry. Ganju explains that she has been tirelessly healing everyone without any break, including fixing up Yoruichi's arm and Ichigo's severe injuries that he had sustained from Uryu in the anime. Chad and Ganju wonder whether if Uryu really has betrayed them. Ichigo then sees a battered Kon in the distance as Orihime explains that Kon did a great job of saving him by puffing up into his muscular form and cushioning Ichigo's fall. Then in a really funny scene, they all pray for him to rest in peace as Kon yells not to kill him off without his permission. He goes on to explain that it was a good thing that he was hiding under Ichigo's robe as he was able to help him when he needed it. In a surprising turn of events, in the anime, Ichigo actually thanks Kon, but Kon argues that he is supposed to beat him up so that everyone then feels sorry for him so that his popularity can be boosted. This, in all honesty, is a really nice anime exclusive scene during the downtime, and I'm so glad that Kon got some appreciation here. We then return to content from pages 14 to 17 of chapter 624 as the episode ends with the return of Grimmjow, who appears from the Garganta. We then do get a brief post-credit scene in this week's episode which reworks some dialogue and manga panels from chapter 626 as Hashward reveals that Yhwach has absorbed all of the Soul King, who is now no more. This manga panel of the Schutzstaffel reacting to Yhwach's new appearance is also adapted. Before the post-credit scene ends, Hashward states that this is the dawn of a new world. Due to how much stuff is being reworked here, there are some omissions which have been left which may or may not be adapted into future episodes, and I think that they are worth mentioning here. So since Yhwach has been revealed to have completely absorbed the Soul King now, it is safe to assume that the downtime that the Schutzstaffel had in the manga has been cut. In page 16 of chapter 625, we see the Schutzstaffel sitting on some sofas in a room while Yhwach is absorbing the Soul King. Lil Barrow wonders if they should be doing something, but Askin says that if they were to be on the same level as Yhwach, then they would be consumed by him. Gerard then comments on why the newcomer Uryu looks so worried as he reassures him that Yhwach will absorb the Soul King and come back stronger than ever. Uryu agrees as we then cut to some manga panels of the Soul King's empty crystal structure on the floor with Yhwach standing over it. In the anime, Yhwach destroyed this and absorbed the Soul King's body, which in the manga had seemed like he had absorbed the Soul King from within the crystal. So all of this does seem like it's been cut from the anime. In page 6 of chapter 626, Hashwald tells the Schutzstaffel that the Soul King is gone while they are sitting on the sofas in that room. But as we have just seen in the post-credit scene of this episode, the Schutzstaffel never left Yhwach, and Hashward tells them this while they are still standing in front of him. So this week's episode of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime delivered another exciting blend of manga content mixed with anime original material. Episode 31 did an incredible job of pulling in previously unadapted content from earlier chapters and incorporating all of these elements from chapters 612, 613, 614, and 617 into new scenes. Some of my favorite anime original scenes in this episode included those involving Shunsui's character, as the second half of this episode restructured so many moments from the manga while also adapting all of chapter 624 and including anime original content too. Things like Aizen having Hashwald's dialogue along with some new lines about him sensing Yhwach's power, and then that really funny con scene at the end. I feel like additions like this offer some unique perspectives which add a lot of depth to the anime in comparison to the manga. Shunsui's character got so much love and respect, which he truly deserves, and I love that we get to see these original scenes of him fulfilling the role of a head captain, as he had taken on that responsibility back in Cour 1 very reluctantly. One of the most intriguing aspects of this episode is that Ukitake and Mimihagi still appear to be alive. While at the start of chapter 621 it was actually revealed that Ukitake's body had collapsed after Mimihagi had disappeared, so I do wonder what additional content around Ukitake and Mimihagi they have planned. Also, this week's post-credit scene introduces a shift which involves Hashwald and the Schutzstaffel, as we have those cut scenes involving downtime from chapters 625 and 626. We know that the anime has been condensing a lot of moments from the manga, with how much stuff is being restructured and changed, as the sequence of events is totally different in the anime in comparison to the manga. Now, I do want to know all of your thoughts about this week's episode of Bleach. Did you enjoy seeing all of Shunsui's anime original content? What do you think about Aizen's return to the story? Were you impressed with his Kurohitsugi scene and when he had released his spiritual pressure as he tried to shoot down the royal palace? Also, what about the reveal of Grimmjow returning at the end of the episode? Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 32, titled The Holy Newborn, adapts a considerable amount of manga material, and it does so very faithfully, and it even covers some content from chapter 617 which wasn't adapted into earlier episodes. For the most part, this week's episode focuses on adapting content from chapters 625 to page 2 of chapter 629. Now, like I've said, a lot of stuff is faithfully adapted from the manga, but we do get some minor anime exclusive additions like Lil Toto, Giselle, and Baz B reacting to the formation of Wahrwelt, Shunsui having new lines of dialogue before the Shinigami enter the gate to the royal palace, along with some dialogue between Yoruichi, Ganju, and Chad, which is rearranged from chapter 626. This episode features a lot of downtime, with Ichigo and his group returning to the royal palace thanks to the powers of Riruka and Yukiya, while the Gote 13 make their own way to the royal palace thanks to a gate that is being created with the combined efforts of Urahara and Mayuri. Meanwhile, Yhwach, who has just finished completely absorbing the Soul King, begins to reimagine the royal palace into his new fortress called Wahrwelt. There's a lot of stuff that I've been waiting to see adapted into this episode, including Ichigo mentioning that he has previously visited the Valley of Screams, which confirms that Bleach Movie 1 is canon. So the episode does begin with a brief anime exclusive scene where Urahara explains to the gathered Shinigami and Quincy that they need to raise their hands while holding the orbs in order to channel their spiritual pressure into the orbs. So we get some great panning shots of all of the Shinigami along with the Quincy as the gate begins to form, but then material from chapter 627 begins to be adapted into the anime. This is where the Quincy cityscape is being ripped off of the Serete, and it is floating up into the sky. Now, while this is happening, the anime includes some original scenes of the gate that they were creating beginning to dissipate. This is in addition to some anime exclusive scenes of Mayuri in the lab with sirens blaring, as the anime uses this new premise which has been set up of Mayuri in the lab to include some content from chapter 617 which wasn't adapted into earlier episodes. In the manga, by this point in the story, the gate was fully formed, but in the anime we are now getting those scenes where the gate isn't properly forming, but we'll come back to how the anime executes upon this later in the video as we now cut to the opening song. Following this, material from chapter 625 is faithfully adapted into the anime. This includes all of the sections of the chapter where Yoruichi explains to Ichigo what they have been planning behind the scenes. All of this is done very very faithfully, as the diagrams from the manga are shown to us in the anime via Yukio creating a screen within his room, while Yoruichi explains to Ichigo how they had utilized the value of screams with the powers of Yukio and Ruruka in order to create a method of transportation to the royal palace. Now, the only real content that wasn't adapted into this episode is stuff that I've mentioned in last week's manga versus anime comparison video, and this is page 16 of chapter 625, and this is where the Schutzstaffel are sitting on sofas while they are waiting for Yhwach to absorb the Soul King. Now, these pages from the end of chapter 625 are not adapted because at this point in the story, Yhwach has completely absorbed the Soul King. Now, following this, we get an anime exclusive scene for a couple of seconds which shows us the gate that the Shinigami have just created beginning to disappear. Now, this perfectly leads us into material from pages 14 to 16 of chapter 617. This is when Nanao comments upon Ukitake having a lot of spiritual pressure which allows him to maintain his debilitated body, and if only he was helping, then the gate wouldn't have disappeared like it is now. Lisa of course reassures Nanao as Hiyori and the other Vizards appear wearing their Shinigami Shihakusho. Now, the only real difference between chapter 617 and this episode is that in the manga, this is where Mayuri had first appeared in front of Urahara, but in the anime, because they've restructured stuff, he's already on the scene and he's in the lab. So none of this introductory dialogue between him and Urahara is adapted into the anime. Instead, we cut to him saying that if they needed a vast amount of spiritual pressure, then why don't they just use his spiritual pressure amplifier? And just like in the manga, Urahara says that he should have told him that he had something like that sooner, as Mayuri apologizes as he didn't anticipate that there would be a situation where they would need it. So yeah, thanks to using the spiritual pressure amplification device, the gate is now perfectly formed, and the anime has now thankfully adapted this content from chapter 617, which we were all fearing was not going to be adapted, since it did involve some important information in relation to Ukitake's character. So I'm glad that we finally have this now in episode 32. Now, following this, we get several panning shots of the Shinigami and the Quincy channeling their spiritual pressure into the orbs, and we get some new dialogue from Shunsui here as he states that Ukitake's efforts will not be in vain. We cut to this shot of Ukitake as Mimihagi is still releasing from his body. It seems like he hasn't died yet, which is very strange. This leads me to believe that Ukitake's role in the anime has not ended just yet. We then cut to material from chapter 626, and this features some downtime with everybody sat within Yukio's room as they travel to the royal palace. Now, everything seems to be pretty faithfully adapted from the manga aside from some new dialogue that Yoruichi has, as she explains to Ichigo that he needs to seize the opportunity by taking down the Quincy with one of his strongest Getsuga Tensho. She also adds that she will back him up if any enemy tries to pursue him, with Ganju also having some new lines of dialogue here stating that he will take care of any of the fodder enemies, and Chad's dialogue in chapter 626 is altered in the anime because in the manga he had asked about the abilities of Parnaida, speaking to Yoruichi stating that he couldn't tell what he had done to her. Yoruichi comments stating that she doesn't know herself, all she knows is that her arm was twisted before she had known it. She advises to stay away from Parnaida, commenting that she'll just deal with him from a distance. Now, these two manga panels are not included in the anime, as instead we have Chad saying that they don't really know the abilities of the Schutzstaffel, as well as commenting on Yhwach's ability the Almighty, which allows him to see into the future. Now, this perfectly syncs back up with the manga as it leads to Orihime questioning if only Ichibe was around they could ask him about the abilities of the Quincy, as then Ruruka intervenes and tells them to stop being so gloomy. Now, material up until page 5 of chapter 626 is faithfully adapted into the anime, but then pages 6 to 9 from chapter 626 are not adapted, and this again is mostly content of the Schutzstaffel sitting around as Hashwad informs them that the Soul King is completely gone now, as instead of this, the anime has a brief anime exclusive scene when we cut to the Schutzstaffel as he is thinking back to Ichigo killing the Soul King, and then him delivering the final blow to Ichigo which had made him fall from the royal palace. So in the manga, the Schutzstaffel actually walk away from Yhwach and they return when Hashwad tells them that he has completely absorbed the Soul King. Now, while returning, Askin has some comments that he thinks to himself that are not adapted into the anime, as he comments on all of that black liquid leaking from Yhwach, which is covering the entire room. Now, in the manga, Yuobak says, "Is that you, Hashward?" commenting on him and the Schutzstaffel returning. But instead of that, Yuobak says, "My children," as he addresses everyone, as the Schutzstaffel did not leave him while he was absorbing the Soul King in the anime. So following this, the rest of chapter 626 is faithfully adapted, all the way up until the point where Yuobak states that they are going to recreate their Quincy nation, and then we get about 20 seconds of an anime exclusive scene which shows us the formation of Vahrveld, as the ruins that have risen from the Serite create this new battleground, joining the 5 separate realms of the Zero Division into a 5-pointed Quincy cross. Now, as the Royal Palace is being transformed, we cut to the mid-card of the episode. Now, the first mid-card is about the gate that the Gotei 13 are creating to enter the Royal Palace, while the second mid-card is about the Valley of Screams, or the Kyogoku. Now, following this, pages 1 to 16 of chapter 627 are faithfully adapted into the anime, so this is up until the point that Urahara says that the gate has completely formed, while we cut to Ichigo and his group as Yoruichi states that they have finally arrived. Now, as Ichigo opens the gate to enter into the Royal Palace, we cut back to the Gotei 13, and Shunsui has new lines of dialogue here as he thanks all of the Shinigami and the Quincy for their efforts, explaining to them that they are about to leave now. Now, when both of the groups arrive, the anime begins to change around some of the sequence of events, because at the end of chapter 627 we just have the scenes involving Ichigo and his group, as Yoruichi comments on how Yuobak has rebuilt the Royal Palace into his own. And then the beginning of chapter 628 features the Shinigami reacting to the transformed Royal Palace. The anime changes this around by having us cut back and forth between Ichigo's group and the Gotei 13. Now, some dialogue that Shinji had stated in page 2 of chapter 628 is given to Hiyori instead. This dialogue is where Hiyori states that they thought that they were coming to the Royal Palace, so why are they in a Quincy town now? So yeah, Shinji says this dialogue in the manga, but in the anime it's given to Hiyori. So yeah, material from the early parts of chapter 628 is combined with the end of chapter 627, just to add a lot more impact to the arrival of Ichigo's group and the Gotei 13 to the transformed Royal Palace. Now, following this, the rest of the material from chapter 628 is faithfully adapted into the anime, aside from a couple of panels where Ichigo, Ganju, Chad and Orihime are trying to imagine how Yoruichi's younger brother would look like. The first image, they imagine a muscular man with a ponytail, but after Yoruichi says that he looks a lot like her, they then imagine a cat wearing a Shinigami Shihakusho with a sword. So yeah, none of these two comedic manga panels make it into the anime. We then have content adapted up until page 12 of chapter 628, but then when Yuobak's castle begins to be created, we get some anime exclusive scenes of Lil Toto, Giselle and Bazbi reacting to the formation of the castle. These are only very brief inclusions, but they add a lot more impact as it shows us everybody who is there on the battlefield, and it's nice that the anime is doing this. I particularly like the change earlier where Shinji's dialogue was given to Hiyori, as it gives a lot more importance to characters who we didn't see much of within the manga, but we knew who were present on the battlefield. We know that the surviving Sternritters are going to be playing major roles in the future episodes, so it is nice that we've got these anime exclusive scenes involving them here, even if they only do last for a couple of seconds. The anime then adapts the rest of chapter 628, as then material from the first 2 pages of chapter 629 are also adapted, as the episode ends with Hashwald stating that they will do everything in their power to defeat the Shinigami in order to bring about the future which is reflected in Yuobak's eyes, and they will achieve all of this at the foundation of the new world here at Vahrveld. We then of course cut to the credits, and there is no post-credit scene in this week's episode. So yeah, content from chapter 625 to the first 2 pages of chapter 629 are very faithfully adapted into this episode. And the only notable omissions were those 2 comedic gag panels involving Yushiro, as well as those panels of the Schutzstaffel having some downtime from chapters 625 to 626. Another notable change or addition that was made here was including content that wasn't adapted from chapter 617, and I'm glad that they were able to include it with how everything has been reworked and restructured. I do have to say that I'm impressed with how seamlessly everything is flowing, despite the amount of changes that have been made to the anime. While there are some notable differences between both versions, it feels like the anime version of the 1000-Year Blood War arc is definitely the more definitive one. Content is being restructured so that it flows better, and at the same time we're getting so many new additions which flesh out the story story as well as the characters. Episode 32, The Holy Newborn, was a very straightforward episode, as it for the most part faithfully adapted all of the manga material that it covered. The end of this week's episode featured a poem from the beginning of volume 73 of Bleach, which had Renji on the cover. This hints at some anime exclusive scenes that we may be getting with Renji in episode 33, which is titled Gate of the Sun. Now this episode is named after chapter 629, so I'm definitely looking forward to seeing what new stuff will be included in next week's episode of Bleach. But we have now reached the point of the video where I do want to hand over the discussion to all of you. Let me know all of your favorite moments from this week's episode. Did you enjoy seeing Grimmjow and Neliel return to the story? What are your thoughts about the Valley of Screams being made canon in the Bleach anime? Did you enjoy seeing the return of the Fullbringer characters Ruruka and Yukio? And what are your feelings about those brief anime exclusive scenes showing us the formation of Vaharvelt, as well as the Sternritter reacting to the formation of the castle? This was another episode which featured quite a lot of downtime, but I promise you from next week there's going to be a lot more fight sequences now that all of the participants have arrived onto the battlefield and the stage has been properly set. Bleach Thousand Year Blood War episode 33, titled Gate of the Sun, adapts less than 2 chapters worth of manga material, as we are blessed with over 10 minutes of anime original content during the second half of the episode. This week's installment of Bleach adapts content from chapter 629, 630 and 635. After the last 2 episodes of build-up, we finally get back into the action, with Kinpachi and Mayuri finally getting some screen time, Grimmjow encountering his first opponent, and not to forget Renji getting an unexpected anime original fight against Uryu. The first half of the episode for the most part adapts manga content, with some stuff being reorganized as we skip content from chapter 631 to 634, which of course is Baz B's highly anticipated battle against Hashwal. After the mid-card of this week's episode, we are treated to several anime original scenes, with the highlight of course being Renji versus Uryu and an all-new exclusive flashback from Renji's training with Ichibei. So Gate of the Sun begins by showing us the landscape of Vaharvelt, and we see this huge Quincy cross with each of the Schutzstaffel standing at each point. A Gate of the Sun is then shown as the title card of episode 33 is also revealed. Now the episode begins with some anime original dialogue from Yuhobak, who calls out to each of the Schutzstaffel, including Uryu. He tells the Schutzstaffel to graciously welcome the Shinigami who have dared to step foot within Vaharvelt, as he orders them to draw their blood so that they can celebrate the birth of the castle. So each of the Schutzstaffel hear Yuhobak's command as they are teleported from the 5 separate points on top of this building, and it seems like a Gate of the Sun is located at the end of each point of this Quincy cross. Okay, following this we cut to the opening song, and then the episode begins by adapting pages 4 to 6 of chapter 629. Now the anime here does have an anime exclusive scene which is fit into all of this manga content, and it's Shunsui speaking with Baz B, Lil Toto and Giselle, as Baz B tells Shunsui that they have no intention of hanging around and taking orders from the Shinigami as they go their separate way. Now the anime does a great job of showing all of the Shinigami and Vizards who are present. When the Shinigami set off, we get another anime original addition here with the Sternritter escaping into the shadows. While the manga focuses on one group, the anime does a great job of showing what's going on the battlefield, as Yoruichi reacts to the spiritual pressure of the Shinigami moving towards the castle, as we get this anime exclusive scene of Ichigo's group also heading out. So after Urahara comments on Mayuri not being with them, we cut to Kinpachi and Mayuri, and this is material adapted from pages 7 to 10 of chapter 629. Now all of this is faithfully adapted, and at the very end we do get an anime original scene, and it's Kinpachi telling Ikaku, Yumichika and Hanataro to charge ahead as Mayuri and Nemu follow them. It's just a small addition which is added to the manga content, which really helps with the continuity, as in the manga during this portion of the story there are a lot of abrupt cuts as we switch from one scene to another, but small additions like this that they're making to the anime really does flesh out what is going on. So following this we continue with more content from chapter 629, and this time pages 11 to 15 are adapted, but a few manga panels from pages 11 to 12 are cut from the anime, and this is a comedic exchange between Ichigo and the others, as in the manga Ichigo comments on how he didn't think that it would be difficult for them to create a foothold within the royal palace, as Chad says that he thought that he was going to die there for a second, but Ichigo says that how was he supposed to know, saying that wouldn't he have tried to team up with Renji and Rukia if he had felt their spiritual pressures. Yoruichi adds that from the spiritual pressure which she had sensed, she also noticed that Yushido did the exact same thing. Now this is in reference to last week's episode when Yushido had sensed Yoruichi's spiritual pressure and had tried to create a foothold, but then had almost fallen off of the royal palace. Yoruichi then states that Yushido and Ichigo appear to be as smart as each other. Ichigo is confused whether if this is a compliment or not, as Yoruichi adds that what part of that did he think was a compliment. Now all of this is condensed down into some anime original dialogue, with Orihime stating that she wanted to meet up with Rukia, Renji and the others, and Ichigo adds that he had wanted to join up with them too, but since they cannot create a foothold here, they have no choice but to fight separately. Now Chad adds to the conversation here, and his dialogue is different to what he says in the manga. So in the manga, Chad says that it would have been nice to meet up with the Shinigami and the others, but it's better not to spread themselves too thin, especially since the Quincy know that they are here, so they have lost the element of surprise. So Chad's dialogue in the anime states that they are fighting against the same enemy, so they are definitely going to meet up with them later. Now the anime then continues to adapt content until Askin arrives and Grimmjow launches the first attack, and from page 15 of chapter 629, we cut to page 6 of chapter 635. Now this is where Gerard runs into a dead end as he yells out to Lil, Pernida and Askin that they had given him the short end of the stick. Now after this, we cut back to the end of chapter 629 where Bazby, Lil Toto and Giselle arrive near Silburn, with Bazby stating that they are going to defeat Hashward and Yuhobak themselves. Then the first 5 pages of chapter 630 are adapted into the anime, and this is where Grimmjow chases after Askin, and then we cut to more content from chapter 635, and this is pages 7 to 11 which are adapted next, and it's all the way up until the point where Askin releases a gift ball which knocks out Grimmjow. Okay, we then adapt a couple more pages from chapter 635, and this is where Lil Barrow is taking aim and eliminating the Shinigami, as the anime shows us him shooting down Hisagi, Omaida, Sentaro, Kiyone and Isane. The anime does expand upon the manga panels by showing the Shinigami and the Vizards splitting up, with Lil Barrow's commentary in the background as he talks about how all living things die when they stray away from the pack. Shunsui, in response to seeing everybody getting shot down, tells the other Shinigami to keep continuing on. Now we then cut to anime original content as Renji is running ahead, but he is then stopped by several arrows which are fired towards him by Uryu. Several people react to Uryu's spiritual pressure, including Shunsui, Urahara, Shinji, Soifon and even Rukia. So Renji rushes towards Uryu with his Shikai activated as Uryu fires a arrow towards Renji, with his attack grazing against his cheek, as this sets up the second half of the episode as we cut to the mid-card. Now the first mid-card tells us a bit more about Varavelt, the residence of Yuhobak and the Quincy. The second mid-card is about Askin Naklevar as we learn details about his Shrift ability, the death dealing. The mid-card explains that when Askin ingests a specific substance, he can precisely determine the complete lethal dose of that substance. So this is in reference to the amount required to cause 100% fatality, and he can freely manipulate the quantity of that substance which is required to be lethal. Thanks to this power, he can instantly poison his opponents. Even substances which are not toxic like blood, oxygen or reishi can become deadly poisons to his opponents if he adjusts their lethal dose. Now this mid-card here explains how his technique called Gift Ball was able to knock out Grimmjow, as he is able to throw a gift ball towards his target as it inflicts them with a lethal dose of a substance. Renji and Uryu briefly exchange some dialogue here as Uryu affirms that there is no future for the Shinigami, as he adds that with Yuhobak having absorbed the Soul King, he has now reached his full power. When Renji asks whether if Uryu had met with Ichigo, but Ichigo proved to be more persistent as he had ended up surviving, but the next time that they meet he is going to finish the job. So this is all that Renji needs to hear as he then charges towards Uryu ready to battle. So the anime exclusive battle begins as Uryu fires multiple arrows towards Renji, who evades them with his high speed movement. Using his Shikai, he clashes against Uryu, who defends himself with a Reishi bow. After several clashes, Renji wastes no time as he activates his Bankai. So this is his true Bankai, So'o Zabimaru, which he had used previously in Cour during his battle against Masked Masculine. Renji then takes the fight long range as he activates a technique called Zazeka, which extends out his blade into different segments as it attacks Uryu. He then swings around the blade using Orochio to attack Uryu in the air. He literally slams Uryu through a building, who manages to then regain his footing. After several clashes, Uryu retaliates with a counter-attack as he fires a bow. Now this scene is really awesome. Renji defends himself by kicking the arrow up into the air. Now the tip of Renji's blade begins to glow as Uryu fires an arrow, but the arrow breaks apart when it clashes with Renji's sword. He then attempts to stab Uryu, but he dodges the attack. Renji's attack goes through a building, and upon making contact, an explosion is set off which destroys several buildings. Uryu takes to the air and fires Licht Regen, but Renji uses the skeletal arm covered in fur as he shouts out Hihiyo as he defends himself from the multiple arrows which are pouring down on him. Okay, so this is really cool. I love how the anime via this original scene is expanding upon Renji's abilities with his new Bankai as he retracts his blade and the snake head extends out into the air and it grabs a massive boulder. Renji then smashes this boulder against Uryu, and while he is falling to the ground, the snake's head grabs hold of Uryu and pins him against a building. Renji then closes the distance and then using the skeletal arm, he charges it up with Reishi and attacks Uryu directly. This sends him flying through multiple buildings as he then crashes to the ground. So Renji rushes in for another attack as he impales Uryu, and he then utilizes his ability Zaga Teppo. Now this attack was strong enough to defeat Masked Masculine, but Uryu is revealed to have survived as he had activated Blut in order to protect himself. Uryu then gets up and activates his holy form, and quite notably Hashward is watching the battle between Uryu and Renji from a distance. Now in his holy form he summons these enhanced Quincy arrows. He then combines them all into an orb and creates one gigantic arrow. Renji clashes against it and deflects its trajectory as the arrow leaves a massive hole in a building behind him as it disperses out above the landscape of Varveld, showing us just how much of a powerful attack Uryu had just casually fired towards Renji. He then fires these multiple arrows towards Renji, who protects himself with the fur-covered skeletal arm. Now small details about Renji's ability are revealed here as Renji joins together his index finger and thumb with the skeletal hand copying him. Now it seems like this action with his fingers had removed all of the fur from the arm as Renji is pushed back by the barrage of arrows. The fur drops around Uryu as Renji transforms the different clumps of fur into multiple skeletal arms which grab hold of Uryu and restrain him for a brief period of time, with Renji stating that this will hold him off for a little while as he only needs 20 seconds. We then get a new flashback scene of Ichibe's training with Renji. Now earlier in episode 18 of the anime we did get a flashback scene which had adapted content from chapter 564. This is where Ichibe had revealed the true name of Renji's Bankai to him. Now this seems like it's a follow-up flashback as Renji had just utilized an all-new technique in front of Ichibe as he comments on how his technique has taken form, but this is to be expected as he is now calling upon the true name of his Bankai. But he says that as his ability is now, he can barely maintain the shape of it and the technique will dissolve within an instant. He tells Renji that he needs to imbue Zabimaru with a lot of Reishi so that his ability will retain its shape so that it can defeat its opponent. He explains to him that his current level of strength, he needs about 20 seconds worth of time to imbue Zabimaru with Reishi so that his ability will be strong enough to stop anyone. So Renji jumps up into the air and with his skeletal arm he swings his sword around as he yells out Zagai Zeko. This of course is his new ability that is being revealed for the first time ever in the anime, and it seems like this is his ultimate finishing attack. As he swings the blade around and gathers up loads of Reishi in the sky, he then fires this huge ball of Reishi towards Uryu, who is restrained. The anime then shows us the landscape of Vaharvelt as we then cut to a new scene involving Mayuri and Kimpachi, as Kimpachi says that it looks like they are putting on a flashy fight, but Mayuri states that a battle that is devoid of any intellect is utterly worthless to him. But he then realizes that Kimpachi is one of those individuals who enjoys mindless battles. Kimpachi then adds that he supposes that the opponents that they are up against are going to be very interesting and intellectual, but Mayuri adds that if no obstacles get in the way, then they will reach the throne of Yhwach faster than anyone else. But he then questions questions whether if Kenpachi wants to be distracted and snack on some appetizers, or if he wants to head for the main course and go for Yuhobak instead. Now following this, we cut to another anime original scene, and this is Askin commenting on Grimmjow, who is supposedly defeated, as he tells him that this is why he had said to him that they should kill Ichigo together. Grimmjow responds by saying that he's going to kill both him and Ichigo. Askin says that it's pretty endearing that he is begging for his life, but then Ichigo intervenes before Askin can do any more damage to Grimmjow, as this sets up for the next stage of the fight against Askin. Okay, so the episode is now beginning to wrap up as we have the final section of Renji's battle against Uryu. We cut back to the fight and there's a massive crater in the ground, and Uryu is laying in the center of it. It seems like Renji's attack had done a considerable amount of damage, as Uryu is left with no choice but to use Scalabarai in order to recover from the attack. And just like Renji had utilized an all-new ability, Uryu utilizes a never before seen technique called Feather Zwinger. So all of these small arrows fire towards Renji, and above him in the sky the arrows form 5 lines. Now each of these lines, made up of arrows, fire down around Renji, trapping him within a pentagon shape. He tries to jump out, but then Reishi emits from each of the lines and traps Renji, holding him in place, and it seems like all of Renji's Reiatsu is being drained from him. Uryu explains how this ability works to him, explaining that this technique will take everything away from Renji to the point where he will not even be able to use his Shikai or Bankai. So after the ability disperses into the atmosphere, Renji falls down to his knees, and you can see that his Bankai has been deactivated and his Zanpakuto has returned to its sealed state. Uryu then tells him that this is the end of his Bankai. He then generates a Reishi bow ready to fire a final attack towards Renji, as Renji struggles to gather his Reishi and activate his Bankai, but because his Reiatsu has been depleted, he is finding it really difficult to. In the end, he just barely manages to have enough Reiatsu to create a skeletal arm, but it isn't covered in fur. Using the arm, he fires a very weak Hikotsu Taiho from the hand, but the attack disperses upon making contact with Uryu's arrow. Now shockingly, Uryu's arrow fires through Renji's chest. Now some have commented that Uryu has fired this arrow through Renji's Saketsu, or his chain of fate. Now this means that Renji has either died here or he has been rendered permanently powerless. So with Renji having collapsed to the ground, Uryu's final line of dialogue comments on Renji's defeat, as he explains that there are 3 reasons why he had lost. The first is that Renji was unconsciously avoiding striking any of Uryu's vital points. The second is that he had underestimated Uryu's power, as he wasn't familiar with his new techniques. And the third and final reason as to why Renji had lost is because he is a Shinigami, the very thing which Uryu despises the most. This is absolutely insane. Just the way that the anime is making me hate Uryu's character, and the way that he is being portrayed is so different to how Uryu's character was handled in the manga. At this point in the story, he has already almost killed Ichigo, and it seems like he has killed Renji here. I'm not sure how all of these events are going to be lining up with Uryu's character in the manga. It seems like at this point in the story, Uryu is under some form of spell, and I'm theorizing that maybe Ryuken needs to appear in Cour 4 to snap Uryu out of this spell that he is under. But yeah, this week's episode didn't have a post-credit scene, as we had ended with over 10 minutes of anime original content as we cut to the credits after Renji is defeated. This was yet again another mind-blowing episode of Bleach which had exceeded all of my expectations. Who would have thought that we would be getting yet another Uryu fight in the anime? I'm really pleased with how episode 33 had turned out. There were some impressive moments of animation here. The manga material that was adapted had seamlessly blended into all of the new material that they had included. This includes the Sternritter interacting with Shunsui, Lil Barrow shooting down each of the Shinigami, Askin's encounter with Grimmjow slightly being expanded upon, Mairi's banter with Kenpachi as the two of them also had new lines of dialogue here, and then the final moments of the episode which gave us that amazing fight between Uryu and Renji. So much has happened within this week's episode, as we are well and truly in the final phase of the 1000 Year Blood War arc. Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 34, titled Baby Hold Your Hand, adapts just over 4 chapters worth of manga material. Now this is taking into consideration content that has already been adapted and stuff that has been restructured to be shown later. This latest episode adapts material from chapters 635 to the beginning of chapter 640. Now following last week's episode, which had over 10 minutes of anime original content which featured the amazing battle between Uryu and Renji, episode 34 focuses focuses on adapting a solid chunk of manga content as we begin Mayuri's battle against Pernida. The first half of the episode adapts material from the midpoint of chapter 635 to the middle of chapter 638. This is up until the point that Mayuri's sunsuit explodes after Pernida supposedly crushes him. The second half of the episode has a similar pacing as we have the rest of chapter 638, which is adapted until the first page of chapter 640. Now, episode 34 remains very faithful to the manga, aside from two minor additions, one involving Lil Barrow at the very beginning of the episode, and then a new scene after the mid-card which features the Sternritters Lil Toto, Giselle, and Baz B. Now, be sure to stick around until the very end of this video in order to find out what these new additions are all about. So this episode begins with a brief recap of the final moments between Uryu versus Renji. Following this, we get a shot of Lil Barrow, who appears to have had his gun aimed at Uryu as he was watching the fight similar to Hashwald. After taking his aim off of Uryu, he then returns his attention to the Shinigami who he was targeting earlier. Now following this, we then begin to adapt material from the midpoint of chapter 635. Now most of chapter 635, which involves the scenes between Grimjow and Askin, was adapted into last week's episode. This is with the exception to the first few pages of the chapter, which has been left for later. Now this is where Yuhabak defeats both Giselle and Lil Toto. Instead of this, the episode has Kimpachi and Mayuri confronting Pernida, as Kimpachi makes the first move attacking Pernida, only to discover that his right arm has been completely chewed up. When Pernida's head begins to enlarge and Kimpachi and Mayuri react to it, the episode then cuts to the opening. Genuinely, I am so impressed with how well the anime had adapted material from the manga, as everything was a panel for panel adaptation. Not a single line of dialogue was skipped, and this is to be noted because these chapters which were adapted into episode 34 were very dialogue heavy, and there were some comedic interactions, especially between Ikaku, Yumichika, and Nemu. So yeah, all of this comedic banter was left intact, as the episode begins by adapting all of chapter 636 very faithfully. After Kimpachi is paralyzed by Mayuri, we have Mayuri explain the nature of Pernida's powers, and when he talks about how Quincy powers work by pouring the power of Reishi into their own veins, we get this flashback sequence of Ichigo cutting down the Soul King, where we see these blue Quincy veins along his right arm, as his body was controlled by the will of Yuhabak, as it perfectly illustrates Mayuri's point when he talks about the nature of Quincy powers. As yeah, the rest of chapter 636 is adapted faithfully, all the way up until Mayuri states that he's going to enjoy testing countless drugs on the nervous system of Pernida. Material from chapter 637 is then adapted when Mayuri speaks with the paralyzed Kimpachi. All of this again is faithfully adapted, including the dialogue between Ikaku, Yumichika, and Nemu, so the anime does add some additional context during Mayuri's umbrella scene. This is where Pernida uses its nerves to attack the umbrella that Mayuri holds up multiple times. Within the manga, things weren't really clear here, but the anime elaborates upon this by showing the nerves trying to pierce the umbrella multiple times. And we also get this scene of Mayuri pulling out a second umbrella as he defends against the nerves of Pernida. Now all of this happens while Mayuri is saying the dialogue from the manga, so if anything, these anime exclusive editions expand upon what is shown in the manga by giving us just a bit more context and making things more clearer for us. So all of chapter 637 is then adapted, ending with Pernida revealing its name to Mayuri. Immediately following this, we get the first half of chapter 638 adapted, and again, similar to the umbrella scene, the anime adds a little bit more context to when Mayuri is escaping from the concrete hands that Pernida is controlling. So we get content adapted up until the middle of chapter 638, where Mayuri appears to have been crushed by the two concrete hands. We then cut to the mid-card of the episode, as this week's mid-cards focus on Pernida and the second focuses on Heiren Hyaku. The mid-card reveals that Heiren Hyaku is a high-level Quincy technique, and is done by gathering and manipulating reishi at the feet, as it allows the user to perform high-speed movement. Mayuri has adapted the mechanics of Heiren Hyaku to suit his own purposes. Now this mid-card is a bit of a spoiler for the second half of the episode, as we haven't seen Mayuri use Heiren Hyaku yet, as the mid-card continues to explain that this technique enables swift movement through the surrounding flow of reishi particles. Mayuri was able to create a similar technique to Heiren Hyaku, as it allows him to have more stable and precise high-speed movement movement in comparison to Shunpo, which is used by the Shinigami, or the Sonido, which is used by the Arrancar. So the second half of the episode begins with this brief anime exclusive scene between Giselle, Lil Toto and Baz B, where Lil Toto says to Baz B that it appears as though he has some history with Hashward, as she tells him that he can handle him while her and Giselle will handle Yhwach. Baz B then gloats that he'll take both of them down, with Giselle adding that she is excited to see both Hashward and Yhwach as zombies. Baz B then tells them to get going as the brief anime exclusive scene ends. So really it's nothing more than a brief pep talk, and it's scenes like this which do a great job of defining these characters, as the Sternritters in the manga version of the Thousand Year Blood War arc had nowhere near enough screen time in comparison to other villain groups like the Arrancar. So yeah, I'm always welcoming of additions like this, even if this brief pep talk is a prelude to a massacre. So then the second half of chapter 638 is faithfully adapted into the anime, as during Mayuri's explanation of Hairen Hyaku, the anime does show us flashback scenes of Uryu using this technique way back during the Hueco Mundo arc, and we also get scenes of Soken and Ryuken Ishida. So content from chapter 638 ends after Pernida had attempted to control the arm of Mayuri, but in retaliation Mayuri had quickly reconfigured the arrangement of the nerves, blood vessels and muscles of his right arm, telling Pernida that it's not going to be that easy to take over his body. As the episode wraps up, we then get material from chapter 639. This is where Mayuri's iconic modified Bankai Konjigi Ashisogi Jizo Matai Fukuen Shotai is first revealed. So this is finally adapted within the anime. So again, chapter 639 is all faithfully adapted all the way up until Mayuri's Bankai devours Pernida, along with the two clones that it has created from its fingers. Episode 34 ends with this manga panel adapted from the first page of chapter 640, where Mayuri is laughing uncontrollably as we cut to the credits. Now, there is no post-credit scene in this week's episode, and well, yeah, it's hard to say anything critical about this episode since it was so faithfully adapted from the manga. Cour 3 has been on a generational run. While this episode didn't really feature a lot of anime original content, it was still an excellent installment which helped to bring to life one of the most iconic Thousand Year Blood War arc fights. The entire Mayuri vs Pernida fight spans almost 9 chapters, thus making it one of the most fleshed out battles in the manga. So there isn't really any need for anime exclusive expansion here. Despite saying this, I would have still loved to learn more information about Pernida's backstory, and while there is a chance that we may get this in the upcoming episodes, for now it seems like the second half of Mayuri vs Pernida is on hold as we switch to Shunsui vs Lil Barrow with episode 35, which is revealed to be titled Don't Chase a Shadow. This is named after chapter 645 of the manga. The anime staff in interviews have said that they had wanted to try to convey that these battles are occurring simultaneously, because the manga did have a tendency to focus on one fight until its conclusion and then move on to the next one. The anime is already restructuring a lot of the manga content, like Hashward vs Baz B, which takes place from chapters 630 to 634, which we know is pushed back, and I'm assuming that they're saving it for the finale of Cour 3. I do hope that we're going to be getting more additions that will expand upon both of their backstory, as I'm really looking forward to next week's episode, with Shunsui finally getting his big fight from this story arc animated next. I'm also excited to see what other restructuring of the manga material will be done and what new additions will be included in order to expand upon the remaining fights for Cour 3. Bleach Thousand Year Blood War episode 35 Don't Chase a Shadow adapts just under 5 chapters worth of manga material, making it the episode with the most amount of manga chapters in Cour 3. This latest episode adapts material from the midpoint of chapter 644 until just before the end of chapter 649. Last week's episode similarly focused on material from the manga, as we had the first half of Mayuri vs Pernida adapted, and this week we see the first half of Shunsui's battle against Lil Barrow. The episode begins with content from chapter 645, where Shunsui showcases his Shikai, with the first half of the episode adapting up to the end of chapter 646, where Lil activates his holy form called the Divine Judgment. The second half sees Shunsui activating his Bankai, along with some new dialogue which is exchanged between Ichigo and Askin. Episode 35 remains very faithful to the manga, but there are one or two omissions that have been made. So the episode begins begins with a bit of a recap of what had happened last week, but in addition to this, we do have the first 3 pages of chapter 640 adapted here. Now, the dialogue is not adapted, but we do see Mayuri's Bankai exploding from the inside out, as this suggests that the battle against Pernida is not just over yet. We then have some anime original reactions from Byakuya, Rukia, Soifon, and Yushiro, as we then cut to content from the midpoint of chapter 644. Now, from this chapter, there are 3 panels of dialogue which are cut from the anime here, and this is where Urahara asks everyone if all of the lieutenants have been taken out. Renji says that he, Rukia, and Momo are still here, and Shunsui confirms that Nanao is still with him. So none of these 3 panels make it into the anime. After Shunsui uses his Shikai ability and appears behind Lil Barrow, as the episode adapts all the way up until the very end of chapter 644. Following the opening song, the episode begins by adapting the first 10 pages of chapter 645. So this is mostly Shunsui telling Nanao to get to safety as she refuses to leave him, as they then talk about the specifics of Shunsui's Shikai, with Shunsui then formally introducing himself as the Captain Commander of the Gotei 13. Following this, the first 4 pages of chapter 646 are then adapted. This is where Nanao relays to the other Shinigami to move on ahead without Shunsui. We then cut back to the second half of chapter 645 as the rest of the chapter is adapted, all the way up until the point where Shunsui says that once a child has grabbed your hand, as Shunsui speaks about how when a child grabs your hand, it's already all over, you're stuck playing until death, as he tells Lil that his hand has already been taken, as he offers to continue playing until their death. Following this, the rest of chapter 646 is adapted from page 5 to 17. This is where Lil restores his Reishi weapon, which was just cut by Shunsui, as Shunsui plays another children's game involving shadows, as he ends up impaling Lil from behind. This leads to Lil opening both of his eyes for the 3rd time in this fight, as Lil then awakens his holy form called Divine Judgment. He then fires these 3 blinding flashes of light towards Shunsui, which gravely injure him, and this takes us to the midpoint of the episode, with the first half having adapted all the way up until the end of chapter 646. We do have 2 mid-cards for this week's episode. The first is about Shunsui, as it explains that he is the current Captain Commander of the Gotei 13, and he was formerly the captain of the 8th Division. The second mid-card is about Lil Barrow, as it explains that his shrift is X for the X-axis. This allows him the power to pierce through everything which is along the line of his sight. He of course was the first Quincy which was bestowed a power by Yhwach, and he is referred to as the greatest masterpiece amongst the Sternritter. He also describes himself to be the closest man to God. Following this, we begin the second half of the episode as we adapt the first 7 pages of chapter 647. This is all the way up until the point where Shunsui uses Hado 78 Zangarin. Now following this, we do have a few pages which are cut or rearranged from the manga. This is pages 7 to 13, and this is where Gerard appears in front of the Shinigami, as Shinji states that they have finally arrived within the enemy stronghold, as he tells Rukia and Renji to get their game faces on, but then suddenly they are confronted by Gerard, as Gerard is making it out as though the Shinigami had bumped into him, rather than he had come flying towards them. So Gerard says that if they wish to go any further, then they'll have to get past him, as Renji immediately strikes. Shinji tells Renji that he'll leave Gerard to him as he continues on forward, but Gerard spreads his cape out wide, preventing Shinji from moving any further. Gerard explains how a miracle may occur on a one-on-one fight, but they still won't be able to beat him, as he tells them all to come at him all at once. Now I do wonder how this scene is going to be adapted into the anime, especially considering Renji got an anime exclusive scene where it appears as though he has been completely taken out by Uryu. So I do think that these few pages from chapter 647, which were not adapted into this episode, are definitely going to be reworked somehow. Now following this, we get an exchange between Ichigo and Askin, and this actually adapts content from pages 1 to 3 of chapter 648, but all of the dialogue is completely changed. So you could say that this is an anime original scene because of how much reworking has been done. So Askin is pushed back after a brief clash with Ichigo, as he says that this is why he didn't want to fight him. We then get even more new dialogue with Askin questioning if Ichigo spent some time at the royal palace. He asks if he had received any weird training or if he had learnt new techniques from Ichibe. Ichigo dismisses his questioning, but this confirms Askin's suspicions, stating that this explains why Ichigo is not experienced experiencing reishi poisoning right now. Askin says that there is nothing to worry about because all that he needs to do is to adjust the flavor in order to make Ichigo susceptible to his poisoning. Now this again is totally different to their dialogue and their encounter at the beginning of chapter 648, as it's mostly Ichigo bumping into Askin as he says that you're that guy from earlier, asking what had happened to Grimmjow. He explains that Grimmjow is just sleeping over there, as Ichigo wonders whether if Grimmjow had lost. Askin refuses to tell Ichigo what happened to Grimmjow, as he instead introduces himself as Ichigo charges towards him. So yeah, it's understandable as to why this has been reworked, since a couple of episodes ago we did see Grimmjow, since the anime reworked this already, since we saw Ichigo appear in front of Askin right after he had beaten Grimmjow. So Ichigo had already known what had happened to the Arrancar. Now following this, we cut back to the end of chapter 647 as we have Shunsui's Bankai activation adapted, and this leads us perfectly into page 3 of chapter 648, where Ichigo reacts to the sudden spiritual pressure release of Shunsui. Now we do have one page from the manga which is cut here, and this is where Ganju, Chad and Orihime exchange some dialogue as they react to Shunsui's Bankai. Ganju wonders why it's gotten dark and cold all of a sudden, but Chad corrects him, stating that the temperature hasn't dropped and it hasn't gotten darker either. Chad just explains that he is feeling the chills. Orihime also adds that she doesn't see or hear anything, but she cannot stop trembling. So instead of getting all of this, we do get to see everybody on the battlefield react to Shunsui's Bankai, which replaces this page from the manga. As then we cut to manga content with Ichigo saying, "Is this the spiritual pressure of Shunsui?" Following this, the remainder of chapter 648 is adapted. This is up until the point where Shunsui activates the third act of his Bankai. Now this takes us to chapter 649, as the fourth and final act of Shunsui's Bankai is adapted, with episode 35 ending on page 15 of chapter 649. So there is a bit more left of the chapter which they'll adapt in a couple of episodes, I think, because it's revealed that next week we are going to be cutting back to Mayuri's battle against Pernida, with episode 36 being confirmed to be titled Baby Hold Your Hand 2. And at the very end of the episode we had a poem which was read by a young Nemu. So for the most part this episode was very faithful to the manga. They did rework that Ichigo and Askin dialogue, which I am glad about, but there were two notable omissions. The content involving Gerard from chapter 647, and then that page of Ganju, Chad and Orihime reacting to Shunsui's Bankai. Now these cuts were made alongside the rearranging of content, because in the manga, Basby vs Hashwad was actually the first fight during this portion of the story. Then following that we had Mayuri vs Pernida, and then Shunsui vs Lil. Now the order of the fights in the manga actually showed all of these fights until their completion, and then we got to see the next one, but the anime is rearranging things so that it appears as though all of these fights are happening at the same time. So we're going to get the second half of Mayuri vs Pernida. I think the episode after that will be the second half of Shunsui vs Lil, and then the final 2 to 3 episodes of Cour 3 will be adapting Basby vs Hashwald. So I am definitely looking forward to that. Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 36, titled Baby Hold Your Hand 2 Never Ending My Dream, adapts just under 5 chapters worth of manga material, thus making it another manga-focused episode with very little anime-only additions. This latest episode adapts material from the beginning of chapter 640 all the way up until the midpoint of chapter 644. This is similar to last week's episode, which also adapts just under 5 chapters worth of manga content, which had covered the first half of Shunsui's battle against Lil Barrow. This week we see the second half of Mayuri vs Pernida, and episode 36 begins with chapter 640, where we see Nemu protecting Mayuri as he scolds her for being reckless. The first half of the episode adapts up to the end of chapter 642, where Nemu fires her Gikon Jurinju against Pernida in a last-ditch attack. Then the second half of the episode adapts material from chapter 643 to 644. This is where we see the death of Nemu, and we also have the return of Xyle Opero as a vision within Mayuri's mind. Now be sure to stick around until the very end of this video, because episode 36 does include a post-credit scene which features some anime original content. So before the intro song, we have about 3 minutes worth of content which adapts chapter 640 in its entirety. So the episode covers pages 2 to 18 all the way up until Mayuri tells Nemu that she doesn't have the freedom to die of her own accord. Before we cut to the opening song, we then have the first page of chapter 640 adapted, and this is a scene showing us when Nemu had first awoken. I think the anime made an excellent decision to rearrange the placement of this one page, because it hints at the larger backstory of Nemu which we do get in this episode. Following the opening song, we begin by adapting manga material from chapter 641, as we see Nemu hand to Mayuri flesh healing medicine, and content from this chapter is adapted all the way up until the point where Mayuri's coagulating drug did not work on Pernida because it had evolved and adapted the abilities of Mayuri's modified Bankai. As Pernida is about to attack Mayuri, we see Nemu take action as she rushes towards her captain. So this is all of chapter 641 here. We then cut to the backstory of Nemu, which begins in chapter 642, as the entirety of that chapter is adapted until the midpoint of the episode. This includes content where Nemu uses the full capacity of her body to rescue Mayuri and then fire her Gikon Jurinju against Pernida. During the midpoint, we get two mid-cards. The first is on Ashisogi Jizo, as it explains that this is the Zanbakudo of the captain of the 12th Division Mayuri. In its Shikai state, a baby's face emerges from the base of the blade, and the blade's tip splits into 3 prongs. It also possesses the ability to paralyze the movements of those who it cuts by injecting poison into their body. The release command of Ashisogi Jizo is RIP, and its Bankai is Konjigi Ashisogi Jizo. This creates a massive caterpillar-like entity with a baby's face that emits poison capable of knocking out enemies in its vicinity, and the midcard also discusses the modified version of Mayuri's Bankai 2. The second midcard focuses on Nemu, explaining that her real name is Nemuri Nanago, and she is of course the lieutenant of the 12th Division. She's described as being one of Mayuri's creations, born from the Nemuri Project. The Nemuri Project was Mayuri's secret research initiative within the 12th Division, as it involves stripping away the concept of ethics in order to create new souls from nothing, as Mayuri's desire was to essentially create an artificial Shinigami. In some way, I think Urahara was researching something similar, where he had wanted to empower Shinigami, as he wanted to use hollows to strengthen Shinigami, since the Gote 13 is effectively a military unit. But it seems like Mayuri surpassed Urahara in the sense that he was able to create an artificial Shinigami born from nothing. Nemuri Nanago is the 7th iteration of the Nemuri Project, and via the backstory that we learn about Nemu, we learn about how these 6 others were failures, and how Nemu is the culmination of all of Mayuri's experiments. The second half of the episode begins by adapting material from chapter 643, and we immediately kick off with the death of Nemu. The anime does a fantastic job of elevating the manga content here, as we have an amazing vocal rendition of the song Here to Stay playing, which adds such an emotional touch to this moment. I cannot lie, I was feeling goosebumps and I was getting really teary-eyed seeing the death of Nemu. Then immediately following this, we have the highly anticipated return of Xyle Opero, as he returns as a figment of Mayuri's imagination, as he taunts Mayuri for being a hypocrite, especially after the speech on perfection that he had given to Xyle Opero during the Huecomundo arc. Mayuri's sadness following the death of Nemu is a contradiction to what he had told to Xyle Opero. This was very important for the anime to get right, because this was a huge key moment for Mayuri's character, and the anime does a fantastic job of faithfully adapting this content. Not a single panel or line of dialogue has been cut, everything has been retained in its entirety, as all of chapter 643 is faithfully adapted into the episode. We reach the end of content from chapter 643 at the point where Mayuri explains that Pernida was self-destruct from excessive growth after it devours the remains of Nemu's body. Then the first 9 pages of chapter 644 are adapted before the episode ends. This involves Mayuri collapsing due to Pernida twisting his legs, as Ikkaku and Yumichika arrive to assist him. Mayuri also explains that a couple of healing pods are there which contain the bodies of Hitsugaya and Rangiku as they finally return to the battlefield, with Mayuri and Kimpachi being placed into their respective pods, with Ikkaku and Yumichika thanking Mayuri for helping Kimpachi. Episode 36 ends with Mayuri stating that he has surpassed Urahara, as Mayuri bows out of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, as he solidified his position as the MVP of this final arc of Bleach. I really do hope that we get to see Mayuri again, maybe in Cour 4 after he's healed up, because there is a lot of opportunity for anime original content in the 4th and final cour of this series. The post-credit scene for episode 36 expands upon some manga material, and this is in regards to Giselle and Lil Toto from chapter 635. We had seen them confront Yuhobak and they were defeated, but this post-credit scene expands their role within the story, as Giselle has brought alongside with her the zombified Bambietta, Meninas and Candice. So essentially all of the 5 Bambis are here to storm the castle, and this anime original scene they are confronted by a group of soldat, but after an initial series of attacks it's revealed that these soldat are no ordinary Quincy, as it appears as though they have been created from the black oozing energy of Yhwach after he had absorbed the Soul King. You can see this black goo take the shape of their body with these eyes of the Almighty all over their face. No doubt these soldiers are connected to the body of Yhwach, so Yhwach must be anticipating that the Bambis have returned. Following this, we cut to a brief scene which alters manga content from chapter 630. So in the anime, Hashwald asks why is Uryu at Ain's Ast, as he orders the soldiers not to let Uryu out of their sight. So this is our first hint at Hashwald having some form of suspicion on Uryu's actions. Now following this, we cut to the arrival of Bazb, as several panels of the manga are cut, as instead this entire page of chapter 630 is then adapted where Bazb arrives in front of Hashwald, as he asks if Uryu really bothers him that much, with Hashwald asking what he is doing, with Bazb responding shouldn't he be asking how he is still alive, with Bazb inferring that Hashwald knew that Yhwach was going to betray all of the Sternritter, including him. So while Hashwald's interaction with Bazb remains the same, it's actually Hashwald speaking to the subordinate soldiers where he gives them the order to follow Uryu, which has been altered. So in chapter 630 of the manga, only one soldier is present, as he updates Hashwald that the Schutzstaffel has been dispatched in 5 directions to locate the enemy. Hashwald then questions the underling, asking 5 directions, as he questions whether if Uryu Ishida is included in what he is referred to as the Schutzstaffel. The soldier states that yes, as it was Yhwach's order to include Uryu within the Schutzstaffel. Hashwald then questions which way is Uryu headed, as the soldier states that Uryu is headed towards the second branch of the Vandenreich city, as he then orders the soldier to go after him. He explains to the soldier that he cannot leave Varevelt, and for him to stay with Uryu, and if he does anything outside of what was ordered, the soldier needs to come and report it to him immediately. Then we have this entire internal monologue where Hashwald states that it was careless of him to allow Uryu to act alone after all of this. He states that without the Sternritter, there is nobody there to keep an eye on Uryu. If Uryu was accepted into the Schutzstaffel, it would have been easy for him to be trusted with a solo mission, and this is what Hashwald was concerned with. So Hashwald then tells the soldier what is he waiting for as he orders him to go, but before he can really set off, Bazb arrives and eliminates the soldier. As you can see in the anime, this has been altered with 4 soldiers present in front of Hashwald, but instead of just 1 being eliminated, Bazb eliminates 4 in the anime. Again, there's a huge difference because Hashwald's suspicions have been toned down massively within the anime in comparison to the manga, as all of this material from chapter 630 has been altered and significantly changed. So that was the 10th episode of Cour 3, and everything is shaping up for a climactic finale where we see the end of Shunsui vs Lil Barrow in the next episode, and the major fight of Cour 3, Hashwald vs Bazb, which has been rearranged and left for the end of the season. The post-credit scene in this episode does a great job of setting up the finale, and I hope that we do have some anime exclusive material which fleshes out the backstory of Bazb and Hashwald even more. And I do hope that their fight has a bit more screen time and emotional impact, because their battle, while it was great within the manga, I thought that it could have been improved with some additional padding, just for the story to solidify the fractured relationship between these 2 childhood friends turned into bitter rivals. Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 37, titled Shadows Gone, adapts just under 4.5 chapters worth of manga material, with very little anime only additions. This latest episode adapts material from chapter 649 to 654. The episode begins with a flashback sequence from chapter 653, and then the first longer half of the episode adapts the most material, covering content up to the end of chapter 652. Here we have the reveal of Nanao Zanpakuto, the Shinken Hakyokan, and the explanation of Shunsui's backstory, which reveals details about his older brother and Nanao's mother. The second half of the episode is much shorter, as the rest of chapter 653 is adapted, followed by the first few pages of chapter 654. So the episode begins before the opening song with a couple of scenes that are adapted. The first is from the beginning of chapter 653, and this is a flashback that has been rearranged to the start of the episode. This is where Shunsui's older brother gifts Nanao's mother those hairpins, and she she asks for him to keep one of the hairpins with him. Here we learn about Shunsui's relationship with his older brother, and how it had improved after Shunsui's older brother had married Nanao's mother. Following this flashback, we cut straight back to the end of chapter 649 as page 16 is adapted, where the light of Lil Barrow fires through Shunsui's gut. Then following this, we cut to the opening song. After the opening, we begin with another flashback scene which has been rearranged, and this is from the start of chapter 651, and it's a scene where a young Shunsui is napping as he is awoken by Nanao's mother. Following this, the final page of chapter 649 is adapted, where Lil yells out that a Shinigami's Bankai is not enough to kill the messenger of God. Then chapter 650 is adapted, when Shunsui pretty much gives up here as he admits that he cannot do anything else if his Bankai hasn't worked against Lil. He decides to fall asleep, but he is awoken by Nanao. Now, while Nanao is waking up Shunsui, it links back to her mother, as we initially hear the voice of Nanao's mother calling him to wake up, as we then hear Nanao requesting for her captain to wake up. Now, this was a really nice small addition to the anime, which links back to Shunsui's backstory and that flashback that we had just seen moments ago. The rest of chapter 650 is very faithfully adapted from the manga, as material from chapter 650 ends at the point where Shunsui summons Kyokotsu, after Nanao requests for him to release her Zanpakuto. So material from chapter 651 is adapted from page 3, and this is where Lil Barrow is looking for where Shunsui and Nanao have gone. Again, everything is very faithfully adapted, from the explanation of the Issei family curse and how Nanao's mother had wanted to lift the curse. Now, material from page 15 of chapter 651 is slightly expanded within the anime, as we have some anime exclusive visuals of the Issei clan rituals. This provides more context to Shunsui's description of how the Shinken Hakyoken is a single Zanpakuto which is inherited by the head of the Issei clan from generation to generation. So content from chapter 651 ends when Nanao is revealed to be wielding the Shinken Hakyoken. We then have chapter 652, which once again is very faithfully adapted into the anime, and while we learn details about Nanao's backstory, the content from page 8 of chapter 652 is slightly expanded, as we have anime exclusive visuals revealing Nanao's proficiency in Kido, which is another really nice addition to the episode. Material from chapter 652 is adapted all the way up until the end, where Shunsui arrives behind Nanao to support her. Following this, we have the mid-cards for this week, and the first is focusing on Katen Kyokotsu, revealing that of course it's the Zanpakuto wielded by Shunsui, and it allows him to transform children's games into reality, and he enforces the rules of these games on himself and his opponent. The second title card focuses on the Shinken Hakyoken, as it describes it to be a sacred Zanpakuto passed down through the Issei clan. It is said to possess the unique ability to reflect the light of God. The mid-card emphasizes that the Shinken Hakyoken cannot directly cut or harm an opponent, and its main use is for rituals which are dedicated to the gods. We then begin the second, shorter half of the episode as material from chapter 653 begins to be adapted. This is where Nanao is pushed back and we see her leg being injured, as Shunsui appears behind her to support her to reflect Lil Barrow's trumpet attack. So after Lil Barrow's attack is deflected and he breaks down, dispersing into these fragments of light, content from chapter 653 pretty much ends. And then the first 5 pages of chapter 654 are adapted into the episode, and this is up until a point where Shunsui collapses and he tells Nanao that maybe they should take a break before they progress any further. And yeah, there is no post-credit scene for this week's episode, as we yet again have another episode that is very faithful to the manga. I would even go as far as to say that this episode is literally a panel for panel adaptation, aside from those minor anime exclusive scenes which expand upon some of the details revealed in the manga. And also those flashback scenes from chapter 653 at the start of the episode before the opening, and then the flashback from chapter 651 which was rearranged to appear right after the opening song. So it's just those 2 flashbacks that were rearranged, but aside from that, the episode had just adapted content from chapter 649 to 654 in chronological order. So yeah, there is no post-credit scene for this week's episode, but the title for episode 38 is revealed to be Friend, and we do have a poem centered around Bazz-B at the end. So that was the 11th episode of Cour 3, so I cannot believe that we only have 2 more weeks of Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episodes before the wait begins for the 4th and final part of the anime. Time really has flown by, and it feels like yesterday that Cour 3 had premiered with that opening episode showing us the defeat of Ichibei. Now in previous cours, at this point we usually would have had a recap episode, and as a season finale we would have ended up having 2 episodes of Bleach released instead of 1. Because we didn't have a recap, some people have been speculating that we only have 2 more episodes of Cour 3, thus making it 13 episodes total. But I'd spoken about this at the end of my review for episode 27, that it's very likely that Cour 3 is going to have 14 episodes. This was based off of leaks from a Russian streaming site which listed 14 episodes for Cour 3, and because the last episode of Cour 2 was incomplete, which is why we had that 10-minute con segment for the second half. This had led to half of the first episode of Cour 3 being a recap of Cour 2's finale, which had meant that there was 1 episode of runtime that we ended up losing. This has been rectified now as Cour 3 will have 14 episodes, so we have 3 more episodes to look forward to. Next week's episode again is titled Friend, which is named after volume 70 of the manga, so from chapter 654 we are going to be backtracking to content from chapter 630 to 634 as the Bazz-B vs Hashward fight is going to be adapted into the anime next. Bleach 1000 Year Blood War episode 38 titled Friend adapts just over 4.5 chapters worth of manga material, with some anime exclusive visuals and a couple of anime only scenes included. This latest episode backtracks slightly from last week's episode, which ended with content from chapter 654, as material for this episode is adapted from chapters 630 to 634. This episode begins with a flashback sequence from chapter 631, with the first half of the episode adapting up to the end of chapter 632, where Yhwach appears before a young Hashward, revealing that he knows his name. The second half of the episode adapts from chapter 630 up to the end of chapter 634, where Bazz-B is defeated by Hashward. There is quite a lot to discuss for this manga versus anime video, as we have several new visuals and a couple of new scenes to break down. So the episode begins by adapting material from pages 3 to 5 of chapter 631, and this is a very brief flashback sequence where we see Bazz-B and Hashward meet for the very first time. After they introduce each other, we then cut to the opening song. Following the opening, we have material from page 8 of chapter 630 adapted. This was previously adapted as a post-credit scene at the end of episode 36, but they have shown this here again in order to reintroduce us to the setting of Bazz-B vs Hashward. So the rest of chapter 630 is adapted, aside from this panel of young Bazz-B witnessing the burning down of his family castle, as this is saved for later in the episode. We then have the first 2 pages of chapter 631 adapted, as we pick up from the very beginning of the episode of that flashback from chapter 631, as pages 6 to 17 are then adapted. As we see Hashward and Bazz-B introduce themselves to each other, we then see Hashward's uncle being introduced into the story, where he says that he is in trouble for having gone so deep into the forest on his own. Everything remains to be very faithfully adapted, as we then cut to Bazz-B activating Burner Finger 3, and then this final page of chapter 631 is adapted within the anime, but it is expanded upon with an all-new anime exclusive scene where Bazz-B witnesses the fall of his family castle. We see several different Quincy accompany Yhwach during this scene, like Zedritz and Hubert, and we even see that Quincy girl who was wielding that gun in the flashback scene at the beginning of episode 24 make an appearance here. So this anime exclusive flashback scene serves to reveal to us how Yhwach was conquering over different Quincy territory before he had planned to take over the Soul Society. So page 13 of chapter 631 is heavily expanded upon with the anime, as we get all new visuals accompanying this internal dialogue which Bazz-B states within the manga. We see how the two of them had lived off of coins that they had found from Bazz-B's fallen castle, and how they joined forces to kill Yhwach. Now after this we do get another anime exclusive scene, and it's where Hashward and Bazz-B are camping as they speak with one another, as Hashward tells Bazz-B that he isn't confident in his own abilities, as he states that he cannot collect reishi and he can't even make a bow. Bazz-B reassures him, stating that he is with him, explaining that their revenge against Yhwach is for both of their sake. He tells young Hashward that he is going to teach him how to make a bow, stating that he will will be able to use its powers in no time at all. The rest of chapter 631 is adapted up until the end, where Yhwach states his desire to take over the Soul Society, as he will need to create a new military division called the Sternritter. Content from the beginning of chapter 632 is adapted then, as the chapter begins with more monologue from Bazz-B as he explains how the two of them had spent their time training over the 5 years. This monologuing is accompanied by additional visuals in the anime which help us to just better understand what was going on in those 5 years. Like, there are shots of Bazz-B taking down a wild boar. We see Hashward then training intensely in a snowy setting, as it further emphasizes just how hard Hashward was trying. The anime then adapts content all the way up until the end of chapter 632, and this is up until the point where Yhwach appears in front of Hashward stating that he knows his name, as he tells him that he is his other half. We then cut to the mid-card of the episode, and the first mid-card is centered around Bazz-B, as it explains that he was born into the Black family, a feudal lord of a certain region, as Baz had grown up in a castle with no restriction. From a very young age, he possessed an extraordinary talent as a Quincy, being able to create a holy bow. After meeting Hashward half a year later, his castle was burned down by Yhwach, thus leading to Bazz-B to focus on honing his own power so that he can take revenge against Yhwach. But when he had learnt about the formation of the Sternritter and he had met Yhwach, he had become angered when he was overlooked by the leader of the Quincy. Now, while later Bazz-B did become one of the Holy Knights of the Sternritter, in the past he had taken the opportunity to rebel against Yhwach, desiring to take revenge against him. And yeah, at the end of the mid-card it states that Bazz-B's shrift is the letter H for the heat. The second mid-card is focused on Hashward, as it explains that he is a boy who grew up in the forest alongside his uncle in a repressed environment. Without any special talent as a Quincy, he used an ordinary bow and arrow to hunt for food. Half a year after meeting Baz, the forest that he had lived in was burnt down by Yhwach, leading him to dedicate himself to refining his own ability. After he had learnt about the formation of the Sternritter, he had met Yhwach, who had welcomed him as his long sought after other half. He had then become a commander of the Sternritter, as Hashward serves faithfully under Yhwach, with his shrift being the letter B for the balance. So following this, we have chapter 633 adapted, revealing how Hashward had ended up joining Yhwach and leaving Bazz-B behind. Material from the end of chapter 633 is incredibly adapted into the anime, as we cut back from the scene where young Bazz-B had fired an arrow at Yhwach, with young Hashward having caught it, and this transitions into the present day where Hashward catches an arrow fired by Bazz-B, as content from chapter 633 ends after Hashward cuts Bazz-B and sends him flying back. Now then, towards the end of the episode, we have material from chapter 634 which is adapted. This shows the final section of Hashward vs Bazz-B, as we have one last flashback sequence which takes place 3 years after Hashward had joined Yhwach. At this point, Hashward has become a commander within Yhwach's army, and Bazz-B had just enlisted into the Sternritter. Now, the material from page 9 of chapter 634 is expanded upon within the anime with some all new visuals which accompany a lot of Bazz-B's inner monologuing, where he explains how Hashward was the commander and how he had continued to ignore all of his challenges no matter how many times that he had taunted him. So then the rest of the episode adapts all the way up until page 17 of chapter 634, and this is where Bazz-B is finally defeated as he falls to the ground. Now, the anime does have some dialogue here which links back to the beginning of the episode, during that time where Bazz-B and Hashward had first met, as we hear dialogue from young Bazz-B telling Hashward that it'll teach him everything that he needs to know in order to become stronger. Then there is no post-credit scene for this week's episode, as episode 39 is revealed to be titled The Visible Answer, and this is named after chapter 660. The poem teasing episode 39 is by Hashward, and it's taken from volume 70. It's where he states that there is no pain as long as I keep my eyes on the balance scale. I cannot believe it, but the finale of Bleach 1000 Year Blood War Cour 3 has come and gone, and it's time to break down and analyze how the final 2 episodes of the season compared to the manga. Episode 39, titled The Visible Answer, is named after chapter 661, and it adapts content from chapter 647 and material spanning from chapters 655 to 659. There is just under 4 chapters worth of content in this episode, with some considerable anime exclusive additions. There are quite a few new scenes and dialogue which pads out the manga. Episode 40, titled My Last Words, is named after volume 72 of the manga, and this adapts content from several chapters, including stuff that wasn't shown in earlier episodes. We have material from chapters 635 and 654, content spanning from the end of chapter 659 to 661, and a very brief scene from chapter 674 which I was really surprised to see here. Episode 40 has more anime exclusive additions, and this is because there is just over 2 chapters worth of content adapted into this episode, which means that there is a considerable amount of anime exclusive material for the final episode of Cour 3. These 2 episodes do a lot to alter the sequence of events from the manga, so as to make it feel like the events are occurring simultaneously. For this reason, there is a lot of padding of manga scenes, with some small additions being made that help certain rearranged scenes transition well from one another. Rest assured, I'll be going over all of the differences, including the 5-minute Quincy Encyclopedia segment that features as the post-credit scene of episode 40. This segment is the return of an old omake from the 2004 anime that used to appear at the end of episodes. Here we do learn some new information about the Quincy from 1000 years ago, so definitely stick around until the end of the video to find out more about that. So episode 39 begins with an anime exclusive scene before the opening song, and this lasts for about 40 seconds. Essentially it shows Mimihagi still releasing from the body of Ukitake, with Mimihagi dispersing out into the atmosphere. We can see that the release of Mimihagi is gradually slowing down, and then we cut to the shot of Yuhobak, who is deep in his slumber. We pan out as he is sat in his throne room as the episode cuts to the opening song. Immediately after the opening song, we adapt manga content from page 10 of chapter 659. Now, page 13 of chapter 659 is entirely cut from the anime, and this entire page is about those collapsed ships which have been entirely cut from the anime. So when Uryu is accused of being a traitor, the manga has Hashward explain that he had found these various different ships located within areas of Varavelt. He explains that he actually found a lot of them. Uryu states that he doesn't recognize them, as Hashward explains that he recognizes the mechanism that was used within these chips, explaining that they have a mechanism that breaks down and diffuses reishi, which is a mechanism very similar to the one used for the Sanrei glove, the one that apparently Soken Ishida had stolen. Also, the first panel of page 14 of chapter 659 is not adapted, as this is where Hashward questions what Uryu was trying to do planting these all around Varavelt. Instead of this, the anime alters all of this to some new dialogue between Hashward and Uryu. So after Hashward explains that it's very troubling to see the future, he insinuates that he knows about Uryu's true motives, as Uryu questions did he see that he had become a traitor with his vision. Hashward then asks why would he say this, as he hasn't explained anything yet. The anime exclusive dialogue is where Hashward states, did you confess your true intentions because you felt you could not hide them in front of His Majesty's power? The anime then cuts to manga content with Uryu saying that that is a false accusation, as the rest of page 14 of chapter 659 is adapted, where Hashward begins to draw out his sword. Following this, material from chapter 647 is adapted, as we see pages 8 to 12 adapted. Now during this we do have some new dialogue from Siphon, and this is where she tells Gerard to get out of the way as they have no time to be talking, and this happens before Renji attacks Gerard. Now after Renji appears, we do have an anime exclusive scene, as Rukia has some new dialogue expressing her relief that Renji is safe. We then get a flashback of the Vizards finding Renji's body after his fight with Uryu. Love notes that the attack against Renji has completely pierced through the chest, as Hachi notes that the injury is remarkably clean, but it is not fatal. Hiyori then urges Hachi to make a large-scale healing spell in order to heal Renji. So there you have it. This anime exclusive scene explains how Renji had recovered following the Uryu fight, and how he was able to appear here and confront Gerard. As we cut back to material from chapter 647, we do get a new scene here of Gerard pushing back Zabimaru. So pages 12 to 13 of chapter 647 are adapted, as we then cut to chapter 656, which is centered around Askin. Now this episode does a lot of chopping and changing between Askin and Gerard. Now because the order of events has been changed, the first and second page of chapter 656 is pretty much cut from the anime. And this is where Askin comments on Gerard finally using his Shrift ability, as he sees the giant Gerard towering over Varvelt. So in the anime, Gerard has just blocked the path of the Shinigami, not allowing them to progress, but in the manga he had already used his shrift to become a giant. So yeah, pretty much the rest of chapter 656 is faithfully adapted until the end. This is where Orihime and Chad arrive and they succumb to reishi poisoning, and then Yoruichi intervenes and she uses her Shunko Raijin Senke. This segment featuring Yoruichi's attack is adapted all the way up until page 3 of chapter 657, as the anime then cuts back to Gerard Valkyrie as material from chapter 655 is adapted. But before this, we do get some new dialogue between Renji and Gerard, and this is while Renji is knocked on the ground. This serves to expand upon material from the first page of chapter 655. So Renji tells Gerard not to get cocky, and if he actually had thought that this many Gote 13 captains had gathered just to fight him. He explains that there is no way that he could win on his own against them. Gerard questions if he really thinks that he can't win. He then states that he will defeat all of them, as that would be considered a miracle. Then material from pages 1 to 5 of chapter 655 are adapted, where Gerard questions whether if they know when miracles happen. So after Byakuya uses his Zenbon petals to take out Gerard, we then cut to chapter 657. So before we return to the Askin fight, we do get a brief anime exclusive scene here, as it shows that earthquakes and tremors have started to happen again, as we see a collapsed Shunsui with Nanao reacting to the shaking. Yoruichi is also seen to be reacting to the shaking of reality. Then we have page 5 of chapter 657, which is somewhat adapted, as Yoruichi's dialogue to Orihime from this page is altered. In the anime, Yoruichi tells her to hurry and heal herself and then head to the main castle, stating that if they don't stop Yhwach as soon as possible, then the world will come to an end. In the manga, however, she tells Orihime to heal herself, and then when she has calmed down, to heal Ichigo and Chad, as she tells them to go ahead. These two panels of where Orihime asks Yoruichi what about her are entirely cut from the anime, as Yoruichi tells her not to worry, as she'll be making her own way after she confirms that Askin has been defeated. Following this, the anime cuts to an exclusive scene showing the trembling of all 3 of the realms. When we cut to the world of the living, we get a new scene involving Yuzu and Karin, as Yuzu yells out to Karin that there's an earthquake, as Karin tells her that she spilled her juice. Yuzu apologizes and questions whether if Karin had lost her game, as Karin tells her that it's fine, that she couldn't focus on the game anyway. Yuzu still apologizes, as Karin states that it's okay once again, but she does note that the tremors are still happening. We then cut back to Hueco Mundo as we see that there are cracks appearing on the ground. We cut to Yhwach still deep in sleep. This black energy then starts to surround Yhwach. We then see those pulsating waves releasing from Mimihagi begin to crack in the sky. Ukitake's body is shaking violently, as it seems as though Mimihagi is gradually dissipating. Now we cut to Yhwach's mouth here, and he seems to be smiling at the fact that Mimihagi is weakening. We then have the mid-cards for episode 39, and the first is focused on Gerard Valkyrie. The second is about Yoruichi's younger brother Yushiro Shihoin, and the second half of the episode begins with yet another brief anime exclusive scene showcasing the 3 realms shaking. We also have this shot of Nanao with Shunsui as she is reacting to the tremors again. Now we cut back to material from chapter 657, but a comedic scene which takes place between pages 6 to 7 are cut from the episode, and this is an interaction between Yushiro and Yoruichi. So Yushiro jumps towards Yoruichi trying to hug her, as Yoruichi avoids him. He eventually grabs hold of her from behind, but Yoruichi headbutts him. Now instead of this, because the content from chapter 657 is rearranged, the scene begins from page 10, where Yoruichi comments on how their recovery was really fast, as she tells Ichigo to go ahead and she'll catch up with them. So up to page 12 is adapted here, and this is where Yushiro corrects Askin on how to correctly pronounce Raijin Senke. We then backtrack and adapt pages 8 to 9 of chapter 657, where Yoruichi questions what Yushiro is doing here, as she thought that he was with Urahara and the others. He explains that he was, but they have so many captains with them, he had figured that he'd come here to help Yoruichi. So after Yushiro begins to to cry as he believes that Yoruichi has recognized that he's gotten stronger. Askin interrupts by stating that that's enough with the sub story. We do have 2 panels from page 10 of chapter 657 which have been cut because of all of the rearranging of content. This is where Yoruichi says that it seems as though he wasn't paying close enough attention. Just because a child is crying, it doesn't mean that it's a sub story. As Askin corrects himself, stating then that's enough with the non-sub story. Again, it's redundant content that didn't need to be adapted, so it's nothing major. So following this, pages 12 to 15 of chapter 657 are adapted, and this is where Askin misidentifies Yushiro as a young lady, as Yushiro then charges at Askin, repeatedly punching him before he releases his Shunko Bakuen Muso. We then return to the Gerard Valkyrie fight as we adapt material from chapter 655. And this is all the way up until the double spread across pages 8 to 9, where Gerard reveals his gigantic form after using his Shrift the Miracle. We then have this brief anime exclusive scene as Rangiku is running with Hanataro, but then she stops and watches the towering Gerard from a distance. As we then cut back to content from chapter 655 as pages 10 to 14 are adapted of the Gerard fight, but amongst them there is an anime exclusive scene here where Shinji and Momo team up against Gerard. So Momo uses a couple of Kido to set off a detonation near Gerard's legs, and then Shinji uses Urahara's signature Kido spell, which is Hado 91 Senju Koten Taiho, and he fires this at Gerard's head. Momo then fires a blast from a Zanpakuto into Gerard's mouth. Now while it seems as though their teamwork was effective, they simply end up getting swatted away by the oversized Gerard. So following this anime exclusive scene, we have pages 15 to 17 of chapter 655 adapted. Now all of this is faithfully done, with the addition of a brief anime exclusive scene where Soifon activates a Bankai attempting to fight Gerard, but she is swatted away alongside Byakuya. So content from chapter 655 ends where Gerard tells them not to lament because no matter how much they lament, there will be no miracle for them, as we see the bodies of Renji and Rukia laying unconscious in the rubble. We then see the final 2 pages of chapter 657 adapted. This is following the aftermath of Yushiro's attack, and then we continue with the Askin fight as the first 6 pages of chapter 658 are adapted. This is where Askin explains that he has become immune to their Shunko as Yushiro is taken out, as he tells Yoruichi that it has taken longer than he had expected for them to comprehend his ability, as he tells her that that is fatal. We then cut to the final scene of the episode, and this is between Hashwad and Uryu. So after Uryu says that that's a false allegation, we have some anime exclusive dialogue between them where Hashwad states that these are the words of one who cannot see the scales of the balance. Uryu asks what does he mean, as Hashwad states that the time has come for the truth to be revealed, as he tells him that he needs to prove to him that he is here as Yhwach's successor. Then the rest of the material from chapter 659 all the way up until the end is adapted, where Ichigo arrives and confronts Uryu. The episode then ends as we cut to the credits. Now episode 39 does have a fascinating post-credit scene, and it's of Isshin and Ryuken as they are stood in front of the grave of Kanai Kategiri, the late wife of Ryuken and the mother of Uryu. Isshin says that he guesses Ryuken had found the grave, as Ryuken asks what does he want, as Isshin explains that he had decided to follow him after he had realized that Ryuken was going to leave for Vaharvel. So that's how episode 39 ends on this amazing post-credit scene. Let's now dive into the manga versus anime comparison of episode 40. So before the opening song, we briefly recap the moments from the end of episode 39 where Ichigo appears in front of Uryu, and this is from the last 2 pages of chapter 659. Then we cut to material from chapter 660, which shows the arrival of Orihime and Chad as Hashwad then appears. Now the first 8 pages of chapter 660 are faithfully adapted, but there is one new line of dialogue that has been included. So after Hashwad activates the Almighty, in the manga Ichigo looks at him, but the anime adds some dialogue to this panel where Ichigo says what's with his eyes, they're the same as Yhwach's. So we then cut to that brief clash between Ichigo and Uryu, and as Uryu is about to fire an arrow at Ichigo, we cut to the opening song. Now following the opening, episode 40 begins with an anime exclusive flashback focused on the Ishida family. Here we see Soken Ishida in his study room, we see Uryu under the bridge reading Soken Ishida's journal, we also see visuals of Ashvalan that was casted 9 years ago, and we learn that this was casted while Masaki was confronting the Grand Fisher. We also have the whereabouts of where Uryu and his mother were when Ashvalan was casted. So at the time they were outside with their maid. So the maid is the first who is seen to collapse, and then Uryu also succumbs to Ashvalan, which is a surprise since it's revealed that he had survived, but for some reason his mother Kanai Katagiri is totally fine. We see her holding Uryu in her arms, as we then cut to a visual of Uryu stood in front of the grave of his mother. Soken is seen watching Uryu near the grave. Uryu is shown reading Soken Ishida's journal as he learns about the truth of Yhwach, as well as the final request of Soken Ishida, as we then see that moment where Hashward appears in front of Uryu as he recruits him into the Sternritter. So that first section of the episode actually shows all of these visuals with some narration from Soken Ishida. So Soken explains that the Emperor Yhwach is not the savior of the Quincy. He explains that 8,000 years ago, in his attempt to heal the wounds of a battle and reign supreme, Yhwach through Ashvalan had stolen the power and lives of his fellow Quincy in order to strengthen his own. So in Yhwach's attempt to heal the wounds of a battle from 1,000 years ago and to once again reign supreme, Yhwach had casted Ashvalan and he had stolen the power and lives of his fellow Quincy in order to strengthen his own. It was at this point that Soken Ishida had come to realize that Yhwach cannot forgive a world that had abandoned the Quincy. Soken explains within his journal that Yhwach will return to bring an end to the world that should not exist. He then urges all Quincy in the present time that they bear a responsibility, that when the time comes they must stop Yhwach, and they must do this with pride in order to protect those who love the world. Now we then cut to visuals of Ichigo versus Uryu, with Uryu monologuing to himself that this is why he had decided that he will draw closer to Yhwach, and by proving himself to him he will be able to slip past his watchful eyes, and then he will commence his true plan. Now it's not revealed what Uryu's true plan is within the anime, as within the manga it had involved those collapsed chips, but since all of that has been cut from the anime, his true plan has yet to be told to us. So we then have this anime exclusive battle sequence which expands upon the fight that Ichigo and Uryu have in chapter 660, as it matches up with page 8 of chapter 660 where Chad grabs Ichigo Zanpakuto and fires him towards Uryu, as Ichigo grabs Uryu as they head to the underground platform. Now we have quite a few anime exclusive scenes here. The first involves the Bambis appearing in front of Yhwach, as Giselle wonders whether if Yhwach is taking a nap, as Lil Toto states how should she know. The Bambis then all jointly attempt to attack the Quincy leader. We then cut to an anime exclusive scene between Askin and Yoruichi, as Yoruichi attempts to tend to the wounds of Yushiro, as Askin states as expected from the former commander of the Onmitsukido. He states that she is really fast, as Askin gloats that he is a bit confident with his levels of speed too, but then he notes that Yoruichi isn't listening to him. Now we get this brief anime exclusive fight sequence between them, as Yoruichi then uses her Shunko to blind Askin, as she then resorts to basic Hakuda attacks, sweep kicking Askin across the face, and then flipping him over and throwing him aside so that she can tend to Yushiro's injuries. We then cut to an anime exclusive scene featuring Gerard, and this is where he is seen to be looking for the hiding Shinigami. He finds Momo and crushes the building that she is hiding within, but then Kensei and Rose appear and it's revealed that they are unzombified. So following this, all of the Vizards then team up, activating their holification as they stand in front of Gerard ready to fight. So then we do get some anime exclusive dialogue here where Gerard refers to the Gote 13 captains as pathetic, as he tells them that this is what his miracle looks like. Rose states that it's certainly a miracle, isn't it? Not being able to crush even one little girl, stating that that is nothing short of a miracle. So with all of the Vizards holified and standing before Gerard, Shinji states that they will show him the miracle of the Vizards. So we then cut to another anime exclusive scene here, and this one involves Yukio and Riruka. So Riruka is pacing aggressively as Yukio tells her that I'm not going. Riruka angrily states that she hasn't even said anything yet, as Yukio Ichigo states that even if they go outside, there's nothing that they can do to help Ichigo and the others. Ruruka states that she gets it, and it must be that Yukio is telling her to keep her promise to Ichigo, as Yukio says, well, kind of, as he then takes his room all the way back down to the Serete, and they appear in front of the Shiba residence. And this is possibly to bring Ginjo and Tsukishima to the royal palace. They then see the Reishi of Lil Barrow falling onto the protective barrier of the Serete, as Ruruka questions what is that. Then material from pages 6 to 13 of chapter 654 begins to be adapted. We have Aizen reacting to Lil Barrow's Reishi as he questions what on earth are they doing up in the royal palace. Now the flamingo Lil creatures attacking the Shinigami is slightly cut down within the manga, as pages 8 to 11 of chapter 654 are not adapted, as Lil explains that the pain is excruciating, stating that his halo is gone, and how it had fallen from heaven and lost its halo, adding that it's as if Lil has now become the sinful one. Lil then begins to fire these blasts in all directions, saying that Shunsui will pay for this, saying that his halo may have gone and he may have lost God's power, but he is still strong enough to trample over the Soul Society. So all of this is not adapted, as the anime cuts to Lil charging up an attack to fire at the Soul Society, but then it is interrupted by the arrival of Izuru Kira. So material is adapted up until that panel on page 14 of chapter 654 where Kira states that he is a dead man. It seems like the rest of page 14 to 15 of chapter 654 have been saved for Cour 4. So following this, we hit the mid-card of the episode, and the first title card is centered around Ashvalan, while the second title card is focused on Uryu's weapon, Zelle Schneider. After the mid-card, the flashback from chapters 659 pages 8 to 10 is adapted. This is where Ichigo questions Uryu on why he doesn't want to become a doctor anymore, as Uryu says in an inner monologue that if being a doctor means having to cut apart your dead wife, then he would not want to be one. We then cut to material from chapter 660, which continues the battle between Ichigo and Uryu. So 2 panels from the beginning of page 11 are cut here, and it's just Chad asking whether if Orihime is okay, as she says that a Santen Kaishun was released just in time to protect her, as she says that Ichigo is fine too. Instead of this, we continue the confrontation between Ichigo and Uryu. Now everything is adapted very faithfully, aside from this removal of content from 2 panels from pages 15 to 16 of chapter 660. Now this involves the explanation of the collapsed chips, which Uryu explains are made from the Sanrei glove that he had received from his grandfather. In the manga, he yells to Ichigo that the chips can only be activated by his spiritual pressure, as instead we get new dialogue of Uryu, which replaces the panel with the Sanrei glove chips explanation. So Uryu says that I'm the only one who has inherited the blood of my teacher and my mother, as the rest of chapter 660 is adapted, as this entire collapsed chips plotline has been removed from the anime, which I'm honestly glad about. It wasn't a really strong storyline in the manga anyway, and I'm glad that they are giving Uryu a new motive and true plan. Now this is yet to be revealed, and they are definitely saving this for Cour 4. Then pages 1 to 9 of chapter 661 are faithfully adapted into the anime. This is where Uryu tells Ichigo to go on ahead and he'll stay behind to stop Hashward. Now before Ichigo leaves, there is some new line of dialogue from page 4 of this chapter, where Ichigo expresses concern for Uryu staying behind to fight Hashward, especially if Hashward possesses the power of Yhwach right now. So yeah, content is adapted up until page 9, so content is adapted all the way up until that point in page 9 where Hashward draws his sword and Uryu draws his bow at Hashward. Now much to everyone's surprise, we then fast forward all the way to chapter 674 as page 17 is adapted. Now this is the reveal of Isshin and Ryuken arriving within Varavelt via an old pass that they had used to teleport into one of the gates of the suns within Varavelt. For some reason, the anime has changed around the order of events and has made them appear within Varavelt way sooner than expected. So we start beginning with the final few moments of the episode as page 10 of chapter 661 is adapted. This is while Ichigo, Orihime and Chad are running, as we see visuals across the battlefield. We see Hitsugaya and Rangiku, Mayuri, as well as Shunsui and Nanao. We then see Squad 12 in the lab within the Serete, as Ukitake still appears to be releasing Mimihagi from his body. So the episode ends by adapting a couple of pages from the beginning of chapter 635. Now this is where the Bambis are shown to be defeated, as Lil Toto says her final words as she also collapses. Now in the manga, Lil Toto and Giselle were beaten before Yhwach had fallen asleep, and this actually happened right after Hashward vs Baz B, which in the manga had taken place before Shunsui vs Lil and before Mairi vs Pernida. In the anime, the Bambis are pretty much off-screened by Yhwach, who is still asleep, and then we get the last two panels of page 1 and some of page 2 of chapter 635 adapted. Then Yhwach's dialogue from page 3 of chapter 635 is cut from the anime. This is where he says that he is going to sleep for a while. This understandably isn't adapted since he is already asleep in the anime. So cour 3 ends as the camera pans out across the battlefield as we cut to the ending song. The final 5 minutes of the episode revive an omake from the 2004 Bleach anime called the Quincy Encyclopedia. This is a fun segment which is hosted by Askin as he reveals the Schutzstaffel lineup from 1000 years ago. He introduces us to Zeidritz, Hubert, Algora and Nikita. We then see a diagram showing the character relations between the four of them, and in the past Zeidritz is revealed to be the former right arm of Yhwach. Hubert believes himself to be the strongest, then Nikita simply likes to shoot, and Algora is described to be a responsible, loyal subordinate. It is revealed that the four of them were defeated by the Shinigami 1000 years ago. The segment then ends with Askin commenting on Yoruichi and Yushiro as he mimics the Bambis towards the end of the segment, and that is pretty much the end of cour 3. Now, one thing that I haven't spoken about is some content from chapter 658 and 659 which wasn't adapted, which seems to have been saved for cour 4. So this is pages 15 to 17 of chapter 658, where Hitsugaya appears in front of Gerard. Then the first 6 pages of chapter 659, which show us Hitsugaya briefly clashing with Gerard as he activates his Bankai Daiguren Hyorin Maru. Like I've mentioned, this hasn't been cut, it's just been saved for cour 4, as the episode did tease some still shots of Hitsugaya, promising that we are going to be seeing him again in the final season of the anime. Well, there you have it, that was my final manga versus anime comparison for cour 3. This was covering episodes 39 and 40 of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. Looking at the numbers, cour 3 has adapted material spanning from the midpoint of chapter 609 to the midpoint of chapter 661, covering roughly 52 chapters worth of content. This is notably less than the 62 chapters which were adapted in cour 1 and the 67.5 chapters in cour 2. What's particularly exciting is that this leaves only 25.5 chapters of manga content remaining for cour 4. This means that we can expect over 57% of the final cour to be completely new material. This is over 7 episodes of runtime or 40 chapters worth of manga content. The implications for this are massive for what's coming in cour 4. We still have major events to look forward to, like Yoruichi's remaining battle with Askin, Urahara and Kenpachi's Bankai reveal, Hitsugaya's adult transformation, and the rest of the Gerard and Askin fight. With Ryuken and Ishin arriving at Varavalt much earlier than in the manga, and the anime's decision to remove the Reishi collapse chips from Uryu's plan, it seems clear that Kubo is taking this opportunity to significantly expand upon the rushed final chapters of the manga. They've also given Uryu a completely new plan which is yet to be revealed, and it's somehow going to be linking back to Soken and Ryuken. Then you have the presence of Ruruka and Yukio at the Shiba residence, which also hints at the early return of Ginjo and Tsukishima, suggesting even more expansion which is yet to come. The anime continues to masterfully weave new content into the existing narrative, from the brilliant explanation of why Yhwach didn't immediately destroy the worlds after absorbing the Soul King, to the expanded roles of characters like the Vizards and Soifon. The addition of the Quincy Encyclopedia also provided some interesting new lore about Yhwach's original Schutzstaffel, showing just how committed the anime team is to giving us new information about the world of Bleach. I have really enjoyed keeping all of you up to date with my episode reviews and the manga versus anime comparison videos, so if you have enjoyed the content, then please do subscribe to the channel and stick around for even more regular Bleach content. Please do leave your suggestions for what videos you would like to see uploaded to fill the space between cour 3 and 4. I really am looking forward to reading all of your comments for the finale of the third part of the 1000 Year Blood War arc anime. And lastly, thank you for making it to the very end of this video, and I cannot wait to see you in my next Bleach video. A massive thank you goes out to all of my amazing Patreon supporters for helping to make this video possible. If you also want to support the channel and see your name in the end of my videos, then check out my Patreon, which has loads of perks like early video access and so much more.
Thank you for sticking around till the end of the video, and whatever you contribute will mean a lot to me.